following video interview is controversial in nature and does not necessarily reflect the views of the producers nor mainstream academia. The viewer is encouraged to refamiliarize themselves with the standard historical and scientific text before making presumptive conclusions.
If I say the word flying saucer or UFO, do you automatically think of somebody who's maybe nuts? You've seen one of these babies flying at high speed with no sonic boom, you know that that whole technology is out the window. Flying saucers are real, man-made machines.
Welcome to the 33rd Parallel, a video series about science, technology, and the politics that control it. What would you say to a person who told you that the history and physics we all studied in school were filled with lies and deliberate omissions? And what if a large part of these lies had to do with man-made flying saucers? Some have experienced bemused condescension at such a suggestion, even anger. After all, even if it were true, how would you prove such allegations? Where would you look? Well, our guest today has done a fair bit of looking on his own, an entire lifetime's worth, and has unearthed some startling evidence. William R. Lyne is the author of 3 books, Pentagon Aliens, formerly Space Aliens from the Pentagon, now in its 3rd printing, Occult Ether Physics, and The Free Energy Surprise. Mr. Lyne was born in Big Spring, Texas, and raised in the boom towns of the great West Texas wildcatters. He had the opportunity of being educated about fuel and its impact on industry firsthand. From there, he pursued an interest in aviation in Army Air Force, where he earned a position in Air Force intelligence. He has acquired a BS degree with a double major in art and industrial technology from Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas in 1969. He also has the distinction of living in New Mexico for the past 25 years, during a time and place where knowledge of saucer technology necessarily meant knowing individuals who worked on top-secret projects at Los Alamos and Alamogordo, where individuals such as Werner von Braun and his Nazi collaborators were well known to the community at large, where, much like those individuals who had the misfortune of living in or near Mena, Arkansas, never got the chance to tell the rest of the world what was really going on. Well, today Mr. Lyne will do just that. Mr. Lyne, welcome to the 33rd Parallel.
Very glad to be here. Thank you.
To begin with, I'd like to find out what the reaction has been to your 2 books. Has it been favorable? Have you gotten a lot of feedback?
I get quite a lot of feedback from the more skillful researchers, people who are really digging for information. I don't get a lot of feedback from people who are convinced that aliens are abducting people and that our planet's being controlled by them.
Or like hate mail from
yeah.
people who
And I get a
don't
dead
like
silence from the organized ufology community, which, in my opinion, is nothing more than a creation of the CIA. What I've found is that the official ufologists, who are actually agents of the CIA, they will not cite any source or reference which they do not control. So they will cite each other constantly. It's very incestuous, but they won't cite an outside person that they don't control, like me. So,
Right. So their best way of approaching that is just ignoring it and hoping it'll go away.
Yeah.
There's another interesting aspect of it as far as disinformation. I don't know if a lot of people are aware of how disinformation works, but there is a lot of methods that are used as far as publication. For instance, in magazines like Aviation Week and Space Technology, which are used, it seems, to diffuse the type of material that you're coming on and talking about. For instance, there was an article in the May 1995 Aviation Week and Space Technologies. It was under the title of air spike technology, using what they called directed energy to suppress sonic booms, to move faster through the air. And they speculated in the article about saucer-shaped aircraft. Do you feel that they would go to the trouble of putting articles like that in the papers to diffuse?
That sort of stuff is what I call it's a standard. All this stuff is, once you've studied it long enough, you realize it's a certain technique. I call it half-truth and the truth of a half. It's like it's either an overstatement or understatement, but in this particular case, they show a technology that, if it were true, it would be highly classified. Why are they putting it in this magazine for everyone to read?
That's true.
And if you examine the article and look and see what they're saying actually in the article, it is very carefully designed to keep everybody's mind thinking about typical standard aerodynamics and the dynamics of sound and pressure, which apparently flying saucers do not obey. I mean, if you've seen one of these babies flying at high speed with no sonic boom, you know that whole technology is out the window.
So you mentioned briefly about CIA tampering as far as media and things of that nature, and how they like to plant articles. A lot of people find this kind of stretching the truth, that they feel that our media can't be corrupted by such things, since we've had these exposés of the CIA and we know how evil they are and stuff like that, that we've somehow ratted this out, and that somehow our media is free to pick any subject that it likes, and it just it's just the fact that they look down their nose at this idea that it could be controlled. What's your response to something like that?
Well, it's ridiculous, because the intelligence community not only tampers with the news media, they have people who are regularly employed to disseminate material through the public media, and they have contacts which they've developed over the years who do it on a regular basis for them, insert material in articles and so forth. They have even job classifications for this very purpose inside the intelligence community.
In fact, they have a neat little name for it, don't they?
Yeah, public information officer is one type of classification.
But the type of counterintelligence disinformation,
yes,
they like to use the term COINTELPRO.
It's like the time that I saw something in a magazine that I knew was classified, and I asked one of my co-workers, I said, how is it they can run this? This is classified. This is top secret. How can they run this in this magazine? He said, there's classified material published all the time in the magazines and papers, but we're not allowed to confirm it. So there's material available that's classified in newspapers and magazines, but it's never confirmed by the government, because that's a violation of the security regulations. And in many cases, someone who suspects something to be true, who's outside the intelligence community, will get something and put it in a publication just to try to evoke some sort of response from the government, to try to get it confirmed.
Oh.
But
maybe they don't have to go that far. There's, on the screen now, we have a Senate committee hearing on, this one's called the Supplementary Detailed Staff Report on Intelligence Activities and the Rights of Americans. This goes into detail about COINTELPRO and how the intelligence community basically influences what they like to call the friendly media. there's plenty of references. In fact, I'll show you the content page here, which talks about COINTELPRO, counterintelligence programs, who they use it on. And down here at the bottom of the screen, I'll just have to read it for you because COINTELPRO techniques in section A called propaganda, they have something called friendly media. What do they mean by friendly media?
Well, that means people who have been on the take. I mean, it's a standard procedure in the publishing business that if you want an article to be run, you just go and hand it to them and put your bribe money right under it.
Sure.
You see, I mean, my sister worked as a newspaper reporter for years, and there were women, for example, in the community whose husbands were lawyers and gave them a regular budget to make sure that their names appeared in the paper so many times and so often.
So motivated, bottom line, basically about money.
Yeah.
It's very simple to motivate people like that. In fact, in this Senate hearing, we have something called friendly media. Much of the Bureau's propaganda efforts involving giving information or articles to friendly media sources who could be relied upon not to reveal the Bureau's interests. That's interesting. So that establishes the fact that there really is media that is willing to go along with this. And we're not talking about some two-bit newspaper out in here in New Mexico or somewhere. We're talking about maybe mainstream media.
There was a recent incident that occurred in relation to the so-called Chinese intelligence flap that's going on through Los Alamos and the other national labs at the present time. And a list turned up in some files that listed various people as pro or anti-lab. And this raised some interesting questions,
Pro and anti-lab.
Oh, yeah, for media releases, you see.
Sure.
They had a whole list of people that were either known as pro or anti, as far as where they could be relied on,
Right.
And so this raised some interesting questions, and they just buried that real fast.
Yeah, that would be a whole other can of worms that might actually educate people about how their government works. And in fact, if people want to know how our government works and who was on this select committee to study governmental operations with respect to intelligence activities, we have somebody named Walter Mondale, another individual whose name is Gary Hart. And if we think that counterintelligence is just something that's on the left, we have Barry Goldwater, if you like the right. So basically it's controlled on both sides. You didn't hear a peep out of any of these characters about these Senate hearings or COINTELPRO. The fact of the matter is that the CIA is heavily involved in this country, as well as the FBI, in disrupting the rights of Americans, wiretapping, influencing the media, planting stories, and anything of this nature. Anybody who's interested in this volume of information can contact Joyce Riley, who talks quite a bit about Gulf War illness and is quite an advocate of exposing government corruption. So now that we've established that the government enjoys manipulating our media, let's talk a little bit about how it might try and cover some technology that they don't want to get into the public arena. Possibly this is a reason why flying saucers aren't talked about in terms of man-made technology. And you feel that there's a resounding silence in the community as far as reviewing your book or reviewing your book fairly in respect to this. Could you give us more details about that kind of reaction again?
Well, first of all, I want to say one thing about those who might be skeptical as to whether or not the government has manipulated them or not. I'll give you an example. You can ask yourself this question of whether or not your mind, your own mind, could be a barometer of government mind control, or rather thought control. If I say the word flying saucer or UFO, do you automatically think of somebody who's maybe nuts or an attention seeker or somebody who's, got psychiatric problems or, New Age, whatever. Just the mention of those words, the fact that it triggers that response in your mind, you automatically think that anyone who says that is off the wall and flaky, shows how much your mind has been influenced. Because
Sure.
flying saucers are real, man-made machines, and there's no proof that they're not man-made, but there's plenty of proof that they exist, and it goes back quite a few years. And this kind of technology that you have the article there on, now that's the kind of article that you find in a magazine about something where they want to make you think, well, we're working on the problem of this advanced flight system like these. That sort of implies that they're recognizing that UFOs exist.
So they're doing a kind of a backpedaling somewhat to
Yeah,
try and
it's
shore
like-
up things in the scientific community that,
we're working on the problem,
right.
and
If
maybe we'll get there someday.
Yeah, if you don't like the flaky stuff that we've been publishing, maybe you'll like something that we put in Aviation Week of Space Technology. The article is called Air Spike Could Ease Hypersonic Flight Problems. And in this article, it's very interesting because if you do take a look at Mr. Lyne's book and then you read this article, it's funny how it's almost like everybody's saying the same thing. This article was published May 15th, 1995, which was released concurrently with the second edition of Mr. Lyne's book. I'm sure that was just a coincidence. The first thing that they talk about is the flight characteristics. Estimates indicate that an air spike-equipped vehicle traveling at Mach 25 orbital velocity with respect to the exterior of the oblique shock wave would actually be subjected to Mach 3 conditions within the pocket formed behind the wave. How is that possible if gravity is not affected?
Well, that would be,
They don't-
17,500 miles an hour, of course. And they're basically, you see, this kind of article, they're not going to use this technology. They just put this article out to make you think they're working on the problem. They're trying to make you think that there's some standard way to make using ordinary shock wave mechanics and electrodynamics and gas dynamics and other scientific disciplines, that they can make a ship go as fast as flying saucers have been reported to go.
Well, it's interesting that they don't even explain why you feel Mach 3 conditions behind the shock wave when you're traveling Mach 25. I mean, that's pretty amazing in itself. The article should be on just that.
Well, what they're saying is that this air spike gadget, which is out in front of this little ship, which is shaped kind of like a little pill, the little spike sticks out, and then there's a little sting on the end. When the sting's not in operation, they say you've got a conical shock wave, and when the sting is in operation, operating at something like 35 megawatts power, and it's a plasma arc torch on the end of the sting, that it creates a parabolic wave which reduces the pressure behind it and reduces the heat transfer problems that are associated with that kind of high velocity. But it's just a theory. It's been, they tested it in a wind tunnel, but they're not going to use it.
The second page of this, which shows the diagram, discusses for speeds above Mach 1, the vehicle would rely on a magneto-hydrodynamic fan engine. The lens-shaped craft would have an interior rectifying antenna to absorb pulsed, focused microwave power on the outside of the vehicle to ionize air forced to the rim of the craft by the air spike. The rectennas, which they like to call it, also would pulse electric power through the ionized air, and in conjunction with two superconducting magnets ringing the craft, accelerate the air aft past the vehicle. According to Mirabo, which is the scientist involved in this wonderful device, this drive system also tends to eliminate sonic booms. Gee, just like what, I wonder? By eliminating pressure discontinuities, so the vehicle is silent but very bright in hypersonic operations. So we have a lens-shaped, glowing object that is silent in flight that he's speculating that someday we might have.
Yes, and what's interesting is the technology's wrong for that kind of propulsion, and they're making it look like that this is just on the horizon. Only 40-something years after the one I saw that didn't make a sonic boom, did not have an air spike gadget on it, and went between 9,000, possibly 25,000 miles per hour in 3 seconds. Now, it did 290-degree turns at above 200 miles per hour, absolutely square turns, and went to the point of infinity, which was the point at which I could no longer see the craft. So the speed of that craft would be determined by how far away I could see it. And I had noticed that I could see my geodesic dome in Hyde Park, which was about 30 miles from my home at the time. I could see my geodesic dome, which was 32 feet in diameter, so I have since revised my statements about the saucer that I believe it was doing more like 25,000 miles per hour.
So it was orbital velocity already?
Yes.
In 1952?
Yes, 1953.
1953.
In late summer of 1953, and there were 6 other people that I know of who were witnessing it, who were with me at the time. And
that's interesting. It's interesting that the same scientist, this character named Mirabeau, we now have up on the screen in Popular Science an article by the same scientist, Mirabeau, who was talking about spinning this wonderful little saucer-shaped object you see here with lasers, kind of like that guy on the Ed Sullivan Show used to spin plates on a stick. This guy does it on lasers now. Apparently this guy's job is to keep creating saucer-shaped gadgets to keep us amused and thinking that things are still being worked on.
Yeah, that uses known technology rather than concealed technology.
So we have a totally different timeline than our friend Mirabeau here.
Yes.
And just to finish up on some wonderful information, we have another saucer developed by Lockheed. This one, of course, has right smack in the middle of it, a fan jet engine so that this thing can fly somehow. And basically just tear itself apart in mid-flight. But,
that device would burn the ship up from the friction of the gases entering the vents if it was enough to propel the ship. The only magazine even anywhere near them, Nexus magazine, which is more
which is out of the country. It's
yeah,
Australian.
Yeah.
So it's not.
And they've done a short review about a couple of column inches on the book.
Was it favorable?
It was. Usually they get everything wrong. They misquote me, and there have been a few writers who have written books. And they will say things that I didn't. Say that I said things that I didn't say, get me confused with other people, and totally distort what I said.
But do you feel that is deliberate?
Sure, certainly it is.
So do you feel that Nexus then is not a good example of something that's independent either?
I don't think so. I think the fact that they they had a change of ownership after they did the review, and they had more interesting, from my standpoint, they had more interesting material in there. Now they have more off-the-wall type of articles and so forth, what I consider off-the-wall.
I've noticed that they've been running these long string of bloodline of Jesus and things of that nature, and Windwalker series.
Chupacabra.
In fact, this brings to mind an article that they stuck in about some eyewitness to the fireballs, or the ones that followed the B-17s in World War II, the Foo Fighters.
Yes.
And this guy went out of his way to say that they were definitely extraterrestrial. And I couldn't help but think about your book and your take on the whole subject, and it just seemed to me incongruous even for Nexus to put something as uninteresting as that in their magazine.
Well, there are things about the fireballs, what they call the fireballs, Feuerball, which Kugelblitz is the German word they use to fire lightning, basically it would mean, which indicate they were manned aircraft. And yet you get a whole misinformational network that insists that there's some sort of little bitty balls like this. Well, the thing about a ball that's peculiar is when you see a ball shape, you can't tell how far away it is from you or how large it is.
Sure.
If you're inside that ball, it looks much larger than it is. If you're on the outside of the ball, it tends to look smaller. That's something I discovered when I built the geodesic dome. And from the outside, it looked a lot smaller, but when you were inside, it was huge.
So spheres have a problem with reference to scale.
Yeah, they tend to
in
shrink.
the open environment.
But it would only take, with the kind of technology that's used in flying saucer propulsion, it would only take a 4-foot ball to get a small person and the power system and everything inside. And the thing about the fireballs that makes them, that tells you that they're man-made and that they're not robot ships that are energy projected from the ground, is the fact that they followed the bombers and did all kinds of little maneuvers that would be far away from any ground base that could be doing the controlling. So they basically had to have a man on board to do that, probably a boy, probably in the Hitler Jugend, trained just for this purpose. And all their main purpose was to disrupt the communications and it was like a red herring, the distraction, because they were bombing the heck out of Germany at the time they got these things into
And the
the
fact
sky.
that the electromagnetic radiation that they would create would disrupt circuits, wouldn't they, if
Yes.
they got close by?
Yeah, they don't need any special technology. I've got article upon article written about how this technology worked to disrupt the communications, and I've got news for them. It takes no special technology. The flying saucer's propulsion system will disrupt communications
Absolutely.
if it comes close to them.
Even in the extraterrestrial literature that they like to give us, cars still burn out, cars stall out and start up later when the thing passes by, things of that nature.
My father was helped for between 15 minutes and a half hour by one of these ships outside Levelland, Texas, in 1957, and he said nothing about it to me, and it wasn't until I turned on the morning news that I realized that his car lights were all burned out. He had to have them replaced, and that's when I realized that he'd had this experience with the ship. And so I went down to the Ford Motor Plant in Odessa, Texas, Ford Motor House, where they sold the cars and fixed them, and walked up to him and I said, "Why didn't you say you saw a flying saucer?" And he said, "Well, how did you know about it?" And I said, "I just turned on the morning news, and there were a lot of people that had experiences last night." And the mechanic said, "You know, this is the first time I've ever seen all the lights on a car burned out and not one blown fuse."
He hasn't seen too many UFO-related car problems.
The Germans were building dozens of weapons from Tesla's papers. And
Including something that might be called a Foo Fighter.
yes. And the Schildkröte, the Fliegende Schildkröte was a flying turtle, which is just another name for a type of Foo Fighter, except that what I've found is that there are several different types of ships. One is a linear, what I call a linear type of ship, and then the other one is a round ship. And the linear ships have a different control system for turning them, whereas the round ships turn in a number of directions. And they turn peripherally. They can go backwards, forwards, right, left, whereas the linear ships tend to turn their one end in the direction of travel, maybe two directions in case of some of the cigar-shaped ships. But this particular type, the flying turtle type, appeared to be the kind that I saw in the U.S. Air Force intelligence films that were made over Germany in World War II, and I have heard various references to these things, that they were unmanned and all this kind of stuff, and that just wasn't true. No, they had a pilot. You could see the cockpit glinting.
It would seem more difficult to have remote-controlled devices in the time period that we're talking about than it would to have an actual pilot,
Yeah.
which in their minds would be expendable.
Well, the film that I saw had some humor. You could laugh if you saw it, because the ship...
You're describing a gun camera
Yes.
footage that you had seen?
Yes, well,
when
it
you
was
were-
actually, the camera operator was behind the gunners. Ordinarily, they mount a camera on guns that takes photos as they shoot, but in this case, the camera operator was behind the gunners, and it was in the side bay with I presume, a 50 caliber machine gun that slid back and forth on this rack that they had it on. And as the plane flew along, the Foo Fighter, or Flying Turtle, was flying in a spiral pathway around the plane like this, very fast. And for comparison for speed, in the picture you see a Messerschmitt 263E, which is a rocket plane, a disposable rocket plane, flying around over here trying to get a shot with its 20 millimeter cannon. And at one point you see the pilot jettison the plane and bails out, and the plane goes down. They were disposable planes made out of plywood.
So both of these, the rocket fighter that you're talking about, and the turtle fighter, I'm just calling them Foo Fighters, were buzzing around this bomber.
Yeah, presumably the Foo Fighter was to distract the gunner while the Messerschmitt guy comes in and shoots him with a cannon. That was the strategy. They didn't have any weapons on the Foo Fighters. Didn't appear like there was any weapons on board.
I see. So they were either going to try one or the other.
And
the Foo Fighter being probably there to, if it could get close enough, disrupt the ignition system. Or if the rocket fighter could get a shot in.
The gunner couldn't get a shot, even though he had some tracers in his rounds. You could see him. He'd swing the gun over here, and the Foo Fighter would come around like this, and as soon as it come into view, he'd start trying to get a shot, but he couldn't give enough lead. He couldn't move the gun fast enough. By that time, he's out of sight. So then he starts pulling his gun over here and waiting for it. And so that as soon as he sees it pop into view, he can pull the trigger and get a lead on it. But he still couldn't. I didn't see any hits. But it was. You can compare the speed of this Foo Fighter and know that it was flying in a spiral path several times faster than the Messerschmitt, which had a speed of over 500 miles an hour.
And there was an awareness from the pilot that it was being shot at and it was trying to avoid.
Yes.
Now, people would listen to this and they're going, my God, I thought Foo Fighters were just some fleeting thing that somebody saw, a couple of times while they're flying their B-17, and now you're talking about, actual air-to-air combat with these gadgets. Obviously, in the mix, fighting a war, then if the question would arise, I guess, that if they had these miracle weapons, let's call it that for now, why didn't they just throw everything they had at the B-17 and just wipe out the entire fleet? They could obviously outmaneuver. They could obviously, do all kinds of things to just basically turn off a B-17 in mid-flight. Why didn't they win the war?
I think they had there were a number of things involved. First of all, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what was going on in World War II anyway. For one thing, the Germans didn't really let loose and bomb England. They could have sent bombers over there and decimated the place. They didn't do that. They believed that they would eventually get the English as allies. The purpose
even while they were at
yes,
World War with this country?
All they intended to do was carry on a terror bombing in England, to terrorize them, to force them to fall into line with them and back them against Russia. They actually believed to the very end that eventually England would see the light and join with them to fight Russia.
Do you think there was anything, in your opinion, behind the scenes of the conventional politics of Hitler was this lone nut who initiated World War II, and we are entitled to only blame him? Are you of the opinion there's something more to that?
Well, there's a big industrial plan. I mean, the thing that I came up with in the book that's very controversial, I'm sure, and I'd heard about it for years, and I'd heard about something called Morgenthau's pastoral policy, and I had heard that it was a forgery. It was supposedly a plan to exterminate the Germans under the Treaty of Versailles. Now, I thought it was curious that there was a second Morgenthau's pastoral policy in World War II, which was authored by Hans Morgenthau's son, or Hans Morgenthau Jr. had authored that plan in World War II, and that was a plan of denazification after the war was over. Whereas the first Morgenthau's pastoral plan, as I found out later, actually turned out to be factual. And the way I found out about this was there was a student at the university who was a PhD candidate in history, and he had access to LBJ's papers. And we were attending a cocktail party before a gala for the arts that was given by Governor Connolly in about 1968, I believe it was. And this guy had introduced himself to me as a PhD candidate in history who was specializing on the Treaty of Versailles. So I said, you might be able to answer a question for me. I've heard about a document that I've heard was a hoax. And he said, what document is that? And I said, Morgenthau's pastoral policy. And he smiled and he said, would you come? You got a few minutes? And I said, yes, I guess so. He says, come with me. So he smartly walks out of the building we're in and goes into the main building, takes me up to, I think, maybe the 4th floor or something like that. Walks in, he opens a vault, and he says, are your hands clean? He says, dust off your hands, make sure your hand's clean. And he goes in and he brings out this document. He says, hold out your hands, and he handed it to me, and it was the document. It was stamped by the Versailles Committee. It was signed by President Woodrow Wilson, and it stated exactly what I had heard. I think the problem with this document, the reason it was called a hoax, is no one knew where it was. If you don't know where a document is, you can't find it.
Right.
And this document probably would have been classified if they'd had a classification system in 1919. However, it did state that the purpose, one of the proposals, the proposal made to the Versailles Committee and introduced by President Woodrow Wilson and Colonel House, which was authored by Hans Morgenthau Sr., it was called Morgenthau's pastoral policy because it stated that the Germans should be exterminated under the Treaty of Versailles because they're an inherently warlike race, and that Germany should be reduced to a pasture land. And
That's pretty drastic.
That was pretty drastic. Imagine what somebody would think if they found out about that. Imagine what kind of results that could have.
Sure. That's controversial in itself, the story you just told. However, there's something even bigger as far as a stalemate that you talk about at the end of World War II. Now, in the books I read, we won World War II. You have a differing opinion about that, and it has something to do with submarines and missiles.
That stalemate was brought to my attention in the same set of documents that this Treaty of Versailles came out of, which was LBJ's papers. These papers are in the LBJ School of Public Service and the Sid W. Richardson Research Center, which were created by Lyndon Johnson. And at the time that I found out about these, they were being stored in the main building until these buildings that were eventually built at the University of Texas were completed. And these PhD candidates had access to these papers, and these papers were presidential papers, so they weren't classified, although they definitely would be if the intelligence community had had anything to do with it. However, there were these papers, and these graduate students had access to them. And this graduate student saw the whole scenario that described the end of World War II, and it involved the Germans sending 24 special U-boats carrying rockets with nuclear warheads, neutron bomb warheads, and they surrounded the country and basically blackmailed the country into signing or agreeing to a certain end of the war, which is different from what we're told. It wasn't unconditional. Yes.
Settlements.
It was a negotiated settlement, and the Germans, by the time they got these subs in position and the rockets ready to fire, the Russians were already overrunning Germany. So it was so late in the war, and at that point, if they'd used the missiles on the United States, they could have bombed us and done a lot of damage, but they wouldn't have been able to even go back to Germany, because by that time the Russians would have it. They would have everything.
A lot of people are under the opinion that Hitler's nuclear program was neglected, that Hitler himself had no respect for it, that he called it Jewish physics, that he was not interested in nuclear weapons. And the other thing I think a lot of people need to understand is when we talk about nuclear weapons, we're not, a lot of people have the vision of the H-bomb in their mind, the mushroom clouds and things like that. That isn't necessarily what they were shooting for. They were shooting for a quick, dirty type of radioactive weapon. You mentioned the term red mercury.
Well, that was a clean bomb. The red mercury bomb, the neutron bomb, is a clean bomb, you see. And in late 1944, Goebbels called Werner Heisenberg, and he said, how close are you to getting a bomb that we could use on New York City? And how big will it have to be? And he said, it would take a bomb about the size of a baseball to do damage to New York City.
He was confident enough at that time to make
Yes.
that claim?
Yes, and he said, you can tell the Fuhrer that we'll have a basketball for him at Christmas. And so there you've got a neutron bomb. And the thing that corroborated this for me was in approximately 1961. When I was working for Union Oil Company of California, I worked with an engineer from Roswell named Dave Dunn. And during the war, Dave was the commandant of the POW camp in Roswell, and where the prisoners of Rommel's Afrika Korps were brought. And the prisoners had postcards with them, which showed New York City being nuked. It was a nuclear weapon. You could tell the cloud was a nuclear cloud. And the photograph was a composite of two photographs. And they were halftones made by Hitler's, or rather Rommel's, field lithographers while they were in North Africa as a morale builder. And what they'd done is they'd taken a picture of their neutron bomb tests, which they did on the Libyan desert, which is why they were down there in the first place. They took a photograph of the neutron bomb explosion and a photograph of New York City, and they superimposed, they put these things together in a montage to show New York City being hit by this nuclear weapon.
I think people would be a little traumatized to think that somehow the end of World War II ended differently than most people have been taught.
Well, it's a peculiar thing. I mean, it's a peculiar thing that people have this understanding that the Germans were just out to kill everybody in sight, and that they would have used a weapon if they'd had it. That's not necessarily true, because they had many opportunities to do much more damage than they did and didn't. So it all depends on a lot of peculiar circumstances. After all, you had a leader, Hitler, who was guided by astrology. You know, if the stars weren't right that month or that year or that day, it would influence everything.
So you feel that might have played into some of his decision-making or lack thereof?
It probably did. After all, you had one of the top leaders, Hess, who took off in an airplane and flew to England thinking he was going to convince the English to join with Germany against Russia.
I guess
And
that would be a bit delusional, wouldn't it?
And, you know, he actually believed he could do it. And he had good reason to believe that there was plenty of influence in England, and believe me, there was plenty of influence in England along that direction. But Churchill wouldn't have it.
Now,
So,
I think a lot of people would be comforted by the fact that if you were the only one that was making these outrageous claims about stalemates with nuclear weapons launched from submarines,
yes.
maybe they would like to pick this up at their nearest Borders bookstore. Actually, this was printed in 1995. It's called Vengeance, Hitler's Nuclear Weapon, Fact or Fiction. This individual states in the inside of the cover here, from 1943 onwards, Hitler and the Nazi propaganda machine poured forth a torrent of warnings to the Allies about a miracle weapon. This book reveals that far more lethal vengeance weapons existed, not as a wild fantasy of Hitler's imagination, but a form of a cargo of highly radioactive material carried in a modified V-2 rocket designed to be launched from special sites in France. These deadly rockets had the potential to turn Britain into a radioactive wasteland. This man is an engineer. He worked during World War II. He has diagrams and also the photographs of the silos. in France, this technology existed.
Oh, this very definitely. I've heard stories that what they'd done. I don't add much credence to this. That what they tested in North Africa was the atmospheric bomb. Which is propane gas that's exploded, and there's a second detonation. And these things are very close to nuclear power, but
Almost like an air fuel bomb.
Yeah, air fuel bomb, what they call an atmospheric bomb. That's not what they tested. I don't believe that. They went down to North Africa to test this, and they covered it up by saying that they were fighting a delaying action, because from the time, and I don't remember what year it was, that Hitler transferred 15 mobilized units from the Western Front to open a new front or from the Eastern Front to open a new Western Front. The generals knew from that time on that it was just a matter of time before the war was lost, and everything was a delaying action from that time on. And that's at that point is when they sent Rommel to North Africa, which is ridiculous because that's just definitely out in left field. Why would he go down to North Africa to test the neutron bomb? To test weapons they couldn't test anywhere else.
Yeah, what were they there to do? Capture some land?
Sure.
Some nice desert land?
And the whole thing is, there's already documentation to back this up that the Germans were making several attempts to bomb New York City. That was a big fixation, I think. And some of these battles actually occurred within eyesight of land. Now, there was one case where I think they called it the April attack, where they sent something like 5 submarines. It might have been 5, might have only been 3. I don't recall right at this moment. And there was a carrier 12 miles away from this submarine. When the submarine was finally hit, it set off an explosion which rocked the carrier 12 miles away.
So apparently there was something pretty explosive on that.
Yeah, carriers don't rock very easily.
What I'd like to show now is a photograph which comes from the book Vengeance. I guess we didn't mention that the fact that the Japanese and the Germans were still allies at this point. And what we're looking at here are 2 Japanese submarines. These are the world's largest submarines in the world at this time. They carried aircraft on them, and they also carried all of the material to make nuclear weapons in their cargo. The book also goes into detail. It gives you a list of the material that they were shipping to Japan, back and forth from Japan, basically, which could be used for nothing else but the making of nuclear weapons. And again, this author feels that this was, in fact, their intention.
Well, they found one large sub in Indonesia, a German sub. They captured a German sub carrying a large shipment of mercury to Japan. And so it indicated that the Japanese were getting ready to build red mercury neutron bombs, and the Germans were assisting them. I'll give you an example of how we're lied to. If you ask anyone at Los Alamos when the first nuclear explosion was detonated in the United States, they will tell you that it was the Trinity Site explosion. But the fact of it is the first nuclear explosion detonated in America that I know of was on the Sacramento River in California. It was a Navy test.
How is that possible?
They did it. They did it in the Sacramento River, and they even filled a ship full of sailors, what some people think were sailors. Actually, what they did is they had the military police go out on the streets of San Francisco and round up all the zoot suiters they could find, and there were 400 of these people put on one of these ships and used in this nuclear test on the Sacramento River. And they set off a nuclear detonation in the Sacramento River at a place called Port Chicago, California.
Now, were there eyewitnesses to this test? I mean, we're
sure.
talking about Sacramento.
Yeah. Well, it was a witness. There were plenty of witnesses. How do they shut all those people up? I don't know. All I know is they do it. That's a big question. How do you get that many people to shut their mouths?
I guess back at the period of time we're talking about, it's a little more, probably a little easier. There were probably a whole lot less people that we're talking about. We're not talking millions.
Yeah, they took. It was a Navy conducted test. They had a lot more power in those days than they do now. They could clear the area of people, a lot easier than they would now, and people would obey them without.
And where does this information come from?
I am trying to remember the name of the man who first exposed this, but the information dovetails with the information that I know about the Shore Patrol rounding up Zoot Suiters. I know 3 people who were in the Shore Patrols that rounded up the Zoot Suiters that were used in the test. And I thought they just took them down and shot them on the beach. The justification for rounding up the Zoot Suiters was that they were molesting the wives of soldiers and sailors who were fighting the war.
Are we talking about the same event that they actually made a movie out of called Zoot Suit, where there was a confrontation between Navy sailors and Zoot Suiters?
I'm sure there were plenty of those.
Talking about?
It was probably the same period of time. I haven't seen the movie. I've heard of the name of this movie. Did they show something about
yes,
mass killings and stuff?
I don't think so. I'm just talking about as far as confrontation between.
There was definitely
Zoot
some
Suiters
confrontations going on.
Yeah.
And
it's an interesting subject to turn into a musical of all things. But the fact that
wouldn't be such a pretty musical if the truth were really known.
Absolutely.
That they rounded them up and used them in a nuclear test in the Port Chicago test, and that was before the Trinity site. So the truth about it is the first explosion wasn't at Port Chicago. What is appalling to me is that they ever tested a nuclear weapon in the open air in the continental United States. I can't believe they did it.
Well,
and they were still doing it.
They were probably so ignorant of the after effects of such a thing.
Oh, certainly. They didn't know anything about radiation.
Right.
You
And this was their way to find out. Maybe we'd like to talk a little bit about early vintage disinformation. What pops into my head? Some place around here called Roswell. You had an interesting chapter in your book about Roswell. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, when I was a boy, after World War II, you couldn't get building materials. It was all on a priority because of the war and so forth. GIs had certain priorities that they could get houses, under the GI Bill and whatever. But since we lived in the West Texas town of Kermit, we couldn't get building materials. My father bought the POW camp at Roswell, where they could help Rommel's prisoners during the war. What a coincidence. And so hauled that down to Kermit, and we built a house and a store building and some apartments. Had the first motel there. And housing was there was such a shortage of housing, we had people driving to Kermit to have a place to sleep at night from as far away as Silver City. We had one family that owned a copper mine in Silver City that drove all the way to Kermit, and they would sleep in 24-hour shifts while half the family ran the mine. But anyway, we had connections in Roswell. We had friends there, and we had made trips up there. My father played golf, and I'd gone up there as a caddy when I was just a child, carrying this huge golf bag in these horrible hot weather. I mean, it was grueling. But I saw flying discs at a distance, and I had talked to oil field pumpers who, at that time, that area was just remote. It was hardly anybody living there. It was just a lonely, open expanse down there. And so, the flying saucers were being seen after the war because they brought all these Germans and these ships down there to Alamogordo. Roswell wasn't really a flying saucer base. It was an atomic bomb wing, and at one time had the Enola Gay there before they moved it.
Here we have on the screen here an early article talking about scores of saucers over the northwestern New Mexico oil town of 5,000 population.
Yeah, everyone was seeing these things. Now, so they had to create a scam to convince everybody that these things weren't government ships, even though everybody at first said, well, these are some of those Germans over there at Alamogordo or Fort Bliss or White Sands. That's where these things are coming from. So they created this thing, the intelligence personnel, and I don't believe the ones at Roswell even cooked it up. I believe the ones at Alamogordo did it. They had intelligence. They had guys from the Gestapo over there who had done this same thing in Germany during the war. So they took rhesus monkeys that they were using on the rocket sled to test for acceleration. They had G-suits on these little monkeys, and they had to shave these little monkeys. There were leaks. Their security wasn't as good as they thought, But they also showed newsreels at the movies that showed the rocket sleds with the monkeys on them in 1946.
And you feel that a lot of this stuff is rare now as far as these kind of monkeys for a reason?
Well, they used the rhesus monkeys in their early research, and then they switched to chimpanzees because the rhesus monkeys were probably harder to control. But they were short-tailed East Indian monkeys. And however, my brother-in-law's aunt was the nurse at Roswell, who was present when they brought these monkeys in from this hoax. And that's not too much different than the one I saw that I had a photograph of.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a minute.
And that's interesting. That's very similar. As amateurs, you can see rivets and stuff on there.
Absolutely. Anyway,
Now,
finish your story about the rhesus monkey, and we can continue.
Anyway, my brother-in-law's aunt was in the Bataan Death March, so she was in the Bataan Peninsula during World War II. She had eaten rhesus monkeys because that's what they had to eat in that part. They had to eat the rhesus monkeys and green chili. They had their own version of green chili, which she was used to since she was grown up in New Mexico. And after the war, after she was liberated from the camp, she came back to New Mexico and worked as an Army nurse at Roswell Army Airfield. And she grew up in Mescalero. You see, Mescalero was where Goddard's laboratory was. His test range was at Eden Valley. So my brother-in-law's aunt and her sister, Leona, wouldn't have missed a German count, 21 years old, who was in town for 2 years. You don't think those teenage girls would not notice that German count who was unmarried, who was handsome and debonair and all that stuff? So they knew about von Braun's presence in New Mexico. However, Leona had told me, and laughingly, how silly it was when they brought those monkeys in that Roswell hoax and commenced to do a dissection of the monkey as if they were dissecting an alien, because she knew it was a rhesus monkey all along. She later became a nun, and she's still a nun now. But she was the one that Glenn Dennis talks about.
Now, was this connected to Walter Haut? Did they just continue to
Walter
push
Haut was the PIO, so he sent photographs out when they made that announcement about the alien ship that had crashed at Roswell. Now, here's a PIO who is an intelligence officer, sends out information about an alien ship and sends photographs, and it shows the aliens, which are really rhesus monkeys in G-suits. He sends them out to the area newspapers and a picture of a little flying saucer, which they'd fabricated because intelligence procedures wouldn't permit them to show a picture of a real saucer because that would be a violation of security. So they created a phony little funny book-looking little bubble on the top, and they put an auto antenna on the top, and they sent these out to the area newspapers. But then the Pentagon found out about it and hit the ceiling and sent in people to retrieve all those photographs. Well, 2 of those photographs ended up in Lovington, New Mexico, in an old newspaper office in the back room in a dusty old drawer. A newsman found them there and gave them to me. And I had them for, I guess, a couple of years before they were stolen from me. And they were stolen by a lady who lived with Jacques Vallée, the ufologist.
Oh, Mr.
And they've never been published, so that tells you that the CIA got the photos back.
Yeah, here's Jacques Vallée that's going to give us all the good information, and he doesn't open his mouth about that one, huh?
Electrocraft. Yeah, that's some phony.
Here's another phony riveted UFO for our perusal here.
Yeah, they get a bunch of guys that that nothing's going to be, they're not going to show anything classified. It's supposed to look a lot like the ship that was purportedly seen by, what's his name? What's that guy that saw the chicken feeder? You know?
Oh, Adamski.
Yeah, Adamski.
George Adamski.
Yeah, George Adamski. And so they used that mythology they created. So this looks a lot like the chicken feeder. And,
yeah, next one I'd like to show the type of crowd George Adamski enjoys, or enjoyed he has his little mind control devices on his head for finding UFOs or whatever he wants to do with it. But here's something that a lot of people might be interested in. Looking very comfortable at a UFO convention is a very
Amazing
young,
Randy.
Amazing Randy. Amazing Randy and Andy. You know, just in
Birds
case,
of a feather flock together.
yes, we have our Mr. Debunker here who feels right at home with some really
That's
strange...
the criticism, the big criticism I have about Philip Klass of the PsyCops, you know, Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Paranormal Stuff. And the criticism I have about Philip Klass is he keeps making paranormal claims. You see, Klass asserts that everyone who sees a UFO believes in ghosts and, you know, all sorts of paranormal beliefs. And as far as I know, I don't know too many airline pilots who've seen flying saucers thousands and thousands of times believe in ghosts or any of these other things that he says. So he's making an assertion without any kind of documentation to back it up, you see, and that to me is paranormal. So, you know, he's basically making a mystical claim, and which is out of keeping with his what I call a pseudo-skeptical idea.
Going the other end again, as far as mystical claims, we have an individual named Brother Philip here, who, in another life, his name was George Hunt Williamson.
Yeah.
You familiar with George?
This is early. What's the date on this?
You know, it's hard to say. I think this is around 1971.
Okay. See, during World War II, the German intelligence community had a whispering campaign that they were meeting with alien Venusians in Peru. And so this is just a continuation of the intelligence stuff that the Nazis started.
Here's a good photograph of our friend George Hunt Williamson.
A distinguished young American anthropologist.
Yeah, Brother Philip in a previous life here. He also was a member of the Adamski expedition on November 20th, 1952, when physical contact was made with a flying saucer. And one of the occupants, it was Dr. Williamson who made the plaster cast of the footprints of this man from outer space. So we have an early rendition of their bull.
They get a credentialed archaeologist or anthropologist, I take it back, and that's kind of like Zachariah Sitchin, this guy who reads Sumerian and is going to tell us about the alien reptiles.
You're not going to tell me that Zachariah Sitchin is not being straight with us.
I know a lot of people who are duped by that stuff.
Oh yeah,
and I can't believe
it's very popular. Here's another. You might call it an alternate biography of George Hunt Williamson. Claimed a doctorate in anthropology and was one-time follower of Guy Ballard's I Am movement, an organization with an unsavory reputation for overlap with the pro-Nazi Silver Shirts.
Isn't that interesting?
An American subversive body broken up by the U.S. government after America entered World War II. Yeah. And now he's called Brother Philip. Let's see. Williamson organized the mysterious Brotherhood of the Seven Rays, which he presided over as Brother Philip in a remote retreat high in the Andes Mountains of South America. He was certainly an initiate, and he was given to ciphers and intrigue. This is from a book called The Secret Ciphers of the Euphonauts. But I thought that little short biography deserves some mention.
Yeah, the I Am movement and the Silver Shirts. Yeah, and Walter Pelly and the whole thing. You know, I mean, that doesn't surprise me because the first time I heard this story about the little alien reptile who lived under the pyramid at Giza, it came from a Navy intelligence worker,
You think that they'd
CIA.
You think that they'd have better things to do with their time?
Yeah, well, this guy claimed that, and all he was doing is repeating the stuff. He had the documents with him, which on contract for Wright-Patterson, he was rewriting for American distribution. And these documents, what they were, was the Ostara documents that were the basis for the Thule-Gesellschaft in Germany. They were originally created by Father Joseph Lanz, who later became Georg Lanz von Liebenfels and founded the new religion called Order of the New Dawn, also known as Ostara, which later became Ashtar, or Ostara, when this guy, Hundley, rewrote it for the CIA. Then it became known as the Ostara religion. The Cheneys led that group, and it still exists. This Mrs. Cheney is still alive, but her husband apparently has already passed away. But now we know it as the same thing that we see on the what is it called, the Stargate SG-1 series.
Oh,
It's
is that
based
right?
on that same thing. Now
That's true, and you have the lizard character who reveals
All they
himself.
do is they take an ancient religion that's based on some folk mythology about animals, and all of a sudden that snake becomes this alien serpent who lives under the Great Pyramid at Giza.
Yeah, it never ends.
So all that stuff is in that Stargate stuff.
Now-
and it's now known as the Ashtar Command, too. That's another
Oh, I
name
think
for
I've
it.
seen that in our local New Age bookstores in the used section.
But it's a Nazi religion, and it's the basis for the Thule-Gesellschaft.
Here's something that we might want to take a look at as far as Brother Philip. This is an interesting mention of international bankers in the United Nations, which I thought was quite ironic in some respects. The United Nations must collapse because that which you read from the Nostradamus forces is true. The warlords, the international bankers, will use the United Nations to form their super government. This will not be. There are no Christ forces in the United Nations. That does not mean that there are not some good people who are in the United Nations, but the organization itself is a center using gullible people. I say it is a demon controlled and must go down. The Master has said, it is written in Corinthians by our beloved Paul, all forms of authority and power must be put down before I come. And the United Nations fits that category. Now, you'd think that these characters who, pretty much are United Nations cheerleaders would have a little nicer things to say about the United Nations.
Well, the strange thing about it is the way I can think about it is I believe that the United Nations is actually a pre-planned continuation of the Third Reich. And
You feel there's a connection?
Yeah, definitely. And I believe that, if you looked at the Nazi ideas, they were divided. There was one group that wanted it. They were kind of like the Trotskyites and the Stalinists, The Stalinists wanted to rule from Mother Russia, and the Trotskyites wanted an international communism, truly international communism. Well, the Nazis, some of them wanted a nation state from Germany, while the others wanted an international Nazi state. And the idea was national concentrationism, and that appears to be what they're doing. Look at what they're doing in Kosovo. They're purifying that area, driving out all the Serbs, so they have a purely a racially pure group there. And meanwhile, the Serbs will be over here, and everybody's
so the
getting
ethnic cleansing is being
it's
accomplished by
basically
somebody.
just separate everybody so they can create frictions when they want to control everything.
Sure. And it doesn't hurt to have one of the the biggest mines in the world, the fourth largest, right there in Kosovo, which is ironic. It is, I'm sorry, the name escapes me right now, but
they
that's
have
in
minerals there.
That's in the open literature. You
But
can read
I
that.
feel like the real value of that area is ancient. That is a pathway, a land bridge, a pathway between Asia and Europe. And if the Chinese ever want to conquer Europe, they'll come right through there, the land army. You can't conquer people with aircraft. You have to have a
you
land
have to
army.
hold the ground.
And if they've got those Albanians who have always been pro-communist, they've always been pro-Chinese, They've never really been in with the Russians, even during all the communist years of the Soviet regime. They've always been tighter with the Chinese, and it looks like they're creating a pathway for the Chinese army to conquer Europe. That's just one theory, but that's a possibility.
Well, a lot of people neglect to look at the strategy of these global events, and I think it's prudent to do so sometimes. One last comment I'd like to make about our friend Brother Philip here, up in the corner here. We have an interesting little symbol. Maybe you'd like to comment on how that...
That's one of the disguised forms of the all-seeing eye of God that you see on the dollar bill. The pyramid with the eye.
Yeah.
And the triangle with the dot, and that was the symbol. The triangle with the dot in the middle was the symbol used on the P2 project. And of course, von Braun was a Prussian member of the Masonic lodges in Prussia, and that goes back to the Prussian Illuminati, and that was the symbol used in that project, that P2 project.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, we see coincidences everywhere, and of course, if you see in the lower corner here, we have
the Ankh, the
Ankh.
Egyptian Ankh built into there.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure that was just coincidental, as most things are.
Well, you see, I believe that the people that design this stuff are these old Nazis from the Ahnenerbe who studied all this ancient history and stuff. And that's who the CIA hired. At the end of I say hired, they formed the whole CIA around them. They were the nucleus of the American CIA and the National Security Agency. As a matter of fact, the name Reichssicherheitshauptamt means National Security Agency Division 6.
How about that?
And the Division 6 of the Gestapo was the highest level area that dealt with this flying saucer technology.
So they traded in their jackboots and put on suits, and everything's all better now.
Now we've got, all this stuff to keep us mesmerized. The whole idea was based on a mass psychology program that was dreamed up by the Rockefellers and their psychologists. And when they chose Hitler to lead the German people, the idea was to stretch the credulity with paranormal stuff so that the public would accept the big lie. And of course, this stuff is credulity stretching.
Absolutely.
And it makes you really weak in the head. So when the government says something, you don't have any idea what they're talking about.
Sure. I noticed one more thing peeking out in the corner here is another one of their fun little symbols. Just thought I'd throw that
Circle
in.
with a dot.
Yeah. That is, I've seen that in Masonic text as well. So
it's really a sun symbol.
Sure.
And that was big with the Nazis. And of course, you've got the rest of that stuff is just a bunch of mystical stuff thrown into.
Again, another interesting aspect of this thing was if we go back to Lonnie Zamora's sighting, the design that he drew that he saw on the side of the ship was very similar to this.
Well, I show a number of these little things in the book, that 4 or 5 of them. I think I have them in there, this new edition too, of the different symbols that they used that have been seen on flying saucers. Now, the saucer that I saw in '53 didn't have any. I didn't see anything in the way of insignias on it at all.
Probably still a prototype.
And it looked like a very prototypical type of thing, because I've never seen another ship quite like it, except the one that was photographed by William Lyne up in Rangeley, Maine.
Tell us about that. The film footage, what's the deal with Wilhelm Reich? Apparently, the government had a axe to grind with that guy.
Yeah, well, he was looking into stuff, and he was doing time-lapse photography for one thing, and in the time-lapse photography over his laboratory, you can see flying saucers and the constellations passing by while the flying saucers make blurbs like this all around. So he was getting time-lapse photographs, and he thought these were extraterrestrial ships, and he was going to the government to tell them about them. And he didn't realize he was sticking his head in the meat grinder because they didn't like it at all. They considered him subversive, and he was trying to do his duty as an American citizen, And at one point, they were filming his use of the cloudbuster to eradicate a bad cloud of deadly orgone energy, DOR, D-O-R, and he was using his cloudbuster, and the cameraman was behind him, and he and a couple other people were up there using the cloudbuster, and it was near a body of water and some trees, and there was this dark cloud, and he was eradicating it. You see the cloud actually being wiped away by this cloudbuster, and inside the cloud was this flying saucer, and they were pointing the antenna, which is basically what this thing was, at the saucer, and the saucer just started going down, and it went down, and they got excited and took off running, and somebody knocked over the camera, and that was the end of the film. But I actually saw that at a theater, and I was really surprised at.
And how do you feel it got into the theater in the first place?
Oh, I think they filmed it, they boxed it up, they shipped it out before the government even knew the film existed, and by that time people had already seen it, but you'll never see it again. Certainly they retrieved that
They
film.
didn't have that kind of electronic intelligence that they have now.
Now you can't do anything like that and get away with it. It goes through the postal, and they scan it. They can scan letters. They use microwaves. They scan everything in the letter. Even though it's folded up, the microwave device actually unfolds the letter, reads it,
How about that?
even in foreign languages.
You don't see that on the Discovery Channel.
And they scan it for certain words and stuff, and that's been that technology was in existence in 1969. And the microwave can distinguish between different layers of paper, you see, and then unfold the whole thing. This all happens in nanoseconds, you know. And meanwhile, in 1957, the U.S. Air Force had a scanner that could scan Pravda, translate it, and print it out in English in 2 hours, 1957.
And it becomes the L.A. Times.
Yeah. Yeah. And how could they do that in 1957 when
That's
the
pretty
public
impressive,
didn't have
isn't
that technology until about 5 years ago, you know?
That's right. Of
So
course, it goes back to what we were saying about
Technology theft and concealment.
Getting back to World War II briefly, just to finish up, of course, if we are to take into account a stalemate between the Nazis and the Americans at this point, what are we to believe about our old nemesis, Adolf Hitler? You make some claims about him.
Well, people have taken me to task on it, but I honestly don't believe anybody could look that much like Hitler as the man I saw in San Antonio in 1967.
Explain that a little.
And, well, I was selling paintings with my friend on the San Antonio River. I was sitting in the amphitheater. The Arneson River Theater was just across the San Antonio River. And I looked down the walk, and there came a man and a woman. The man was wearing a suit that was a kind of a raw umber color. And, or rather, yeah, it was raw. It was a yellowish mustard color, which was one of Hitler's favorite colors, by the way. And I could see that I could see marks on his face that surgery had been done here, but it didn't affect it. He still looked like who he was. And he was limping, and his pants were too short. That was another thing. He had a habit of wearing his pants too short. And the woman with him had dancer's legs, and she had red hair, and she was a little taller than him. And they came down the walk, and I said, just before this, though, there had been a couple of guys in suits who came up there and went through where we were and talked to us, engaged us in conversation. And they were both electrical engineers from Kassel, Germany.
Huh.
And
That's
I thought,
quite
well, this is interesting. So then these German engineers went on by and then looked down there, and I nudged my friend and I said, look who's coming down the walk. And he said, oh my God. I didn't even have to say. He knew who it was. And I said, look who's coming down the walk, you know. And I said, I didn't want to attract too much attention. I had on sunglasses, and I said, he's going to pick up that painting right there. And I knew he was going to pick up that painting, and he did pick it up. And then all of a sudden, these German quote engineers got his attention, and then he looked up, and he went, and he put the painting down, and they hustled off.
And then what year was this? What year?
1967, when Hemisphere opened.
Oh, interesting.
And then a couple of more, quote, engineers, electrical engineers from Kassel, Germany again, came by and debriefed us and went on with the entourage.
Must have been some kind of tour bus let off there.
Yeah, Hitler was visiting his relatives in Fredericksburg. He had relatives there. He had an uncle there. He had other relatives, yeah.
That's
And
interesting.
as his old uncle told my uncle, he said, "Ach, und dat Adolf always was a troublemaker."
Yeah, that's the understatement of the century. Now, you want to explain to us your contention about how Hitler might have escaped? Because everybody's bringing up these ideas about bone sample, his teeth, his skull.
We
he
had
shot
the
himself.
intelligence photos that the Russians furnished us right in our library when I was in Air Force Intelligence. And they had a picture of the guy they were saying was Hitler, and he was shot in the head. And he had attached earlobes. He looked just like Hitler, but he had attached earlobes. And I said, "That's not Hitler." And these guys said, that worked with us, said, "Why not?" I said, "Look at his earlobes. He's got attached earlobes."
Yeah. It's
And then-
well known that Hitler had over 100 body doubles for
Yeah.
all different purposes.
Yeah, he had 5 main alphas, and they would often be in the parades, and they're not even sure that some of them didn't give some of the speeches that he supposedly gave.
That would be interesting.
And that way he could be in more places at the same time, too.
Sure, that would be a media
Everybody could say they
stunt.
met the Fuhrer and touched him and stuff, The thing about it is, here was 4 or 5 bodies that looked like Hitler found around the bunker. When
why is that when Hitler, if you got 5 of these
what do you
characters?
need so many lookalikes dead, Now, the body that they claimed was Hitler that was burned, okay, that was Goebbels and his wife. They never found Goebbels' body. They never found his wife's body. They found all his children's body in the bunker, all dead.
Now, here's an
But
interesting...
why didn't they find Goebbels or his wife's bodies? Because they were the ones that were burned, and you can take one look at that corpse and know it's Goebbels. You got that Egyptian beak nose, and, and it's not Hitler, And
I'd like to get to Hitler's escape. This is an interesting contention about Hanno Reich. Explain that to us about how this was, because, see, the reason I'm interested in this is that if you look at the conventional literature about the fall of Berlin, it will tell you that there were hundreds of airlifts being, going in and out of there, even while the place was burning down. Are we to believe that Hitler was so insane he wouldn't, hey, let's take a ride in a plane, let's get out of here?
if that was
but you
Hitler's
went a
body
little-
they
you went a
found, the
little
Russians
further.
could produce the DNA evidence to prove it, because they
Sure.
took those bodies to Russia.
Yeah, but
And-
you went a little further with your with how you felt he escaped.
They had a pad built on top of the bunker, and it had direct access from Hitler's room on the very bottom. And all he had to do was go right straight up a set of stairs to the top, and there was a pad, a landing pad that could only be used by a helicopter or flying saucer. And they had one of the top test pilots, Hanno Reich, along with Hans Ulrich Rudel. Now, Rudel was considered to be the successor to Hitler. And, I don't know whether you ever saw his combat record. You
Not
familiar with it?
personally, no.
Fantastic, unbelievable. He personally destroyed, on the Russian front, over 300 Russian tanks.
Holy smokes!
He had a missing arm, and he managed to fly this way. I mean, he just couldn't be stopped. Hitler tried to get him to come back to Berlin, and he refused. Right to his face, he refused, and then Hitler gave in and said, "Go ahead, a real warrior, So he went back and fought to the very end. But here's Rudel in Berlin, visiting with Hitler along with Hanno Reich. There was 2 of the top pilots. I mean, this guy Rudel was phenomenal.
Absolutely, this
He
again
was
is
shot down 38 times.
That's
And
impressive. Again, this is in the open literature about Hanno Reich, for instance, was in the bunker. I mean, you have one of the premier pilots of Germany with Hitler.
And the Russians admitted they didn't get Hitler's body, although they're still squabbling back and forth about it. They haven't so much as admitted. And boy, Stalin really wanted to get him. But supposedly they didn't get Hitler's body. And so my theory is that Hitler was provided with a comfortable place in Kassel, Germany, for the rest of his life.
Why not?
And,
Why not?
beautiful area, and the site of the monument to the Holocaust. What better place to live, And plus I met people who were friends with Adolf Hitler. I met a man who was, this was really odd that this guy popped up when he did, but when I was coming back from Europe in 1975, a man approached me at the La Fonda in Santa Fe and told me that he was a good friend. I don't know why. Why did he do this? You know, it was the CIA. The CIA at that time was trying to hire me. So this guy shows up and he said, I've been a lifelong friend of Adolf Hitler, and I've lived in Bavaria since 1938. And I'm on my way back there. And he was an American, and but he was among Hitler's personal friends. And so I thought, well, this is really odd, you know. How is it that this guy approaches me and
how do you feel
tells me that? Huh?
How do you
It
have
was
an
part of the
explanation?
CIA thing.
So you feel that
it was a CIA thing, you know. It's like when I went to Italy, okay.
Kind of to drop you a line,
It's
just to
like
mess
when
with
I went to the port of Naples, okay, had my baggage. I got off of this Yugoslavian freighter, and I got ready to go through customs. And the Italian customs man said, "You're a very famous man, Mr. Lyne. You can go right on through."
Wow.
And
How about that?
so then when I got to Rome, at the railway station in Rome, after I got off the train, this old mafioso guy approaches me and said, "I love America. I would very much like to come back to America if the government ever permits me. But I'm here to tell you that you are protected. If you ever need help, my room is there in that building. Just ask for me." And I don't remember his name, but he looked like somebody like old Lucky Luciano or somebody, you know. Wow. Of course, Lucky was killed, but he was an old mafia guy who had been kicked out of the country, and he was working for the CIA to work his way back, you know. And he wanted me to know that I had protection, and that was your CIA. That was your George Bush. You know,
I would assume they would know your movements in and out of
it
cities.
was horrible.
Anybody's
I couldn't get
movements.
away from them. They tried to get me at work in the movie industry there. They tried to get me to infiltrate German terrorist groups. There was all kinds of stuff going on. These were like people that worked for Time Life.
And this is because of your family connections that
It was because George Bush and the CIA, you know. I mean, my first cousin was Bush's secretary for 5 years, but my first in-laws apparently were big buddies with the Bushes. And Bush had just decided that I was going to be one of his people, and I don't know, maybe I'd have ended up being Secretary of Defense if I'd have said yes. But I wouldn't have any part of it. Boy, they don't like no for an answer. But it was just the weirdest bunch of stuff you ever saw, and I couldn't get away from them. They were everywhere. I realized that I was surrounded by all these intelligence spooks and stuff when I was in.
they like to keep to their own. So
Yeah, they were actually, even though they were posing as all sorts of stuff, you know, actors and so forth, but they were all on part of it.
art students.
Yeah.
Right.
There weren't any art students. The art thing had really burned out in Germany. But, yeah, I could go on and on about that. I don't want to blow the cover on some of these people. They're nice people, but they're
mixed up with
with
bad stuff.
bad circles. You know, you can't lie down with dogs without getting up with fleas. the way I look at
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank Mr. Lyne for being our guest on the 33rd Parallel. I hope there are many who feel as I do, that it's a good and healthy thing to entertain alternative views on items of such importance as our world history and scientific progress. This is, in fact, the primary objective of this video series. I hope you found it worthwhile, and remember, a good conspiracy depends on your cooperation. Thank you. A companion guide to the 33rd Parallel video series will soon be available. Look for it on our website at www.flyingsaucerfactory.com. Also available now from the Flying Saucer Factory, a German U-boat on the United States coastline, a secret agreement between sworn enemies, an underground base built into the permafrost of Antarctica, Rear Admiral Byrd and his armada of 4,000 men, in a confrontation with unknown aircraft that can fly from pole to pole in a matter of minutes. When reading about it isn't enough, it's time to see what you've been missing. A graphic dramatization of Admiral Byrd's Operation High Jump, fully illustrated by a top Disney TV animator. Order it now from the Flying Saucer Factory at www.flyingsaucerfactory.com. Following video interview is controversial in nature and does not necessarily reflect the views of the producers nor mainstream academia. The viewer is encouraged to refamiliarize themselves with the standard historical and scientific text before making presumptive conclusions.
I'm not surprised at this recent scandal that they dug up about the dumbness of the school books they're writing. Here's the government telling these outrageous lies to every child in America, every adult in America, and every old person in America. They've been stealing and hiding technology for so long, they don't want it to move any faster.
Welcome to the 33rd Parallel, a video series about science, technology, and the politics that control it. For a long time now, scientists have been busy congratulating each other for proving some aspect of the theory of relativity. As recently as 1995, they've rewarded their colleagues with Nobel Prizes and declared long-held beliefs about the theory as proven fact. Meanwhile, we, as part of the unwashed masses, wait patiently for our eminent scientists to let us in on the joke. Aside from the atomic bomb, just what part of this illustrious concept can we hold in our hands and use in our daily lives? One is left wondering if scientists even care about the day-to-day phenomena that are still left unexplained. We may ask, what is gravity? And the answer is gravitons. Or, what is electricity? Well, it's electrons. Aside from their precious relativity, are there coexistent theories that are worth considering? After all, the majority of our greatest scientists, Michael Faraday, James Clerk Maxwell, Sir William Crookes, and Lord Kelvin, never even heard of relativity, nor would it have helped them if they did. Just what made scientists want to embrace the peculiar claims of a second-rate clerk in a Swiss patent office as the preeminent end-all to scientific progress? As almost an apology to the unworkability of Einstein's rants, we are offered a steady stream of new and ever more complex quantum mechanics and string theory to dazzle us, or baffle us beyond belief. If Michael Faraday and Sir William Crookes never used relativity to further their understanding of gravity and electrodynamics, just what did they base their experiments on? And why do we never re-examine those concepts? Is there a forgotten physics with a different set of rules, hidden away from us early in the last century by a powerful elite who fear that the technology based on it will strip away their power and wealth and liberate us from their grip? A bold and outrageous statement that can never be proven, right? Wrong. William R. Lyne is our guest tonight. He's the author of 3 books.
Pentagon Aliens, formerly Space Aliens from the Pentagon, now in its 3rd printing, Occult Ether Physics, and The Free Energy Surprise.
Mr. Lyne was born in Big Spring, Texas, and raised in the boom towns of the great West Texas wildcatters. He had the opportunity of being educated about fuel and its impact on industry firsthand. From there, he pursued an interest in aviation in Army Air Force, where he earned a position in Air Force intelligence. He has acquired a BS degree with a double major in art and industrial technology from Sam Houston State University in Huntsville, Texas in 1969. He also has the distinction of living in New Mexico for the past 25 years, during a time and place where knowledge of saucer technology necessarily meant knowing individuals who worked on top-secret projects at Los Alamos and Alamogordo, where individuals such as Werner von Braun and his Nazi collaborators were well known to the community at large, where, much like those individuals who had the misfortune of living in or near Mena, Arkansas, never got the chance to tell the rest of the world what was really going on. Well, today Mr. Lyne will do just that. Mr. Lyne, welcome to the 33rd Parallel.
Okay, I'd like to get into some free energy technology now. The first thing I'm really fascinated about is your discussion of the atomic hydrogen torch. And if anybody's a welder these days, they probably haven't even heard of an atomic hydrogen torch. Maybe you might want to explain a little bit about that and why it's so special.
Interesting thing is, since I came out with this material, just this year, in the immediate future, General Electric is now issuing a new version of an atomic hydrogen torch. Isn't that
How
interesting?
about that?
And
How did that happen?
a person phoned me the other day and told me all about it. And they have a new atomic hydrogen torch they're preparing to release for the public. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Isn't that a coincidence that it was dead for all those years
Yeah.
and now I published something on it and now they're coming out with it?
Now, I wonder how they're going to explain the inordinate amount of energy. You might want to maybe talk about why this is so special, this torch.
Well, of course, the discovery of the atomic hydrogen, what I call the atomic hydrogen process, was supposedly made by Langmuir about 1909 or 1912. And he was a chemist who had a lot of discoveries in the area of electrolysis and so forth. And he claimed, and of course the thing about Langmuir is he was an early relativist. So
Is that right?
he believed in the relativistic, what I call RQMs, relativistic quantum mechanics. And he basically, believed in the idea that however much energy was produced when the hydrogen recombined was the amount of energy it took to separate the hydrogen molecules into from diatomic molecules into monoatomic hydrogen. So basically, this process involves the separation of hydrogen, which tends to come as diatomic molecules, two atoms together, into its separate atoms. And then when those atoms come back together, they release 109 kilocalories per mole.
It sounds like a lot.
Molecules, per mole. And so that is a lot of energy. Now, what I found was a well-known Encyclopedia of Science, which says that it takes 103 calories per gram mole to separate the hydrogen, although the relativistic quantum mechanics say that it takes the same amount of heat to separate the molecules as you get back when they recombine.
So you're getting nothing in
You
this
end
reaction.
up getting it all, that you're just using electrical energy to separate it, and then you get it back when it combines. Well, why even do it? I mean,
Right.
if you could just do it with electricity, except you get temperatures that are far above what you would get with an electric arc.
In fact, you discovered an old text on this reaction, and even a photograph of an atomic hydrogen torch. Hydrogen being set free in a chemical reaction is often more reactive than hydrogen gas. The activity of such nascent newborn hydrogen in the act of liberation from its compounds is due to the hydrogen being in the atomic state. And down here, hydrogen molecules dissociate to atoms endothermically at high temperatures. Heat of dissociation about 103 calories gram mole. An electric arc or by irradiation. The hydrogen atoms recombine at the metal surface to provide heat for the acquired welding.
Now, I've been assured that this has to be a typographical error on the part of the Van Nostrand Encyclopedia people, even though this particular paragraph comes out of what is something like the 5th edition. Now,
Is
you
that
know,
right?
they're
So 5 editions of mistakes.
Yeah, 5 editions. They have just carried this. Nobody's caught it, you know. And the thing is this company published books on Tesla at one time when Tesla was alive.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, same company.
Well, that's interesting that they would claim that they've made mistakes in 5 editions. Here we have this is circa 1933. It's a welding book, welding and its applications, and it has here atomic hydrogen arc welding. In general, it says here, molecular hydrogen, or hydrogen in its normal state as distinguished from atomic hydrogen, is a diatomic gas. That is, each molecule consists of 2 atoms. When hydrogen is broken down into the atomic form, it is very active and has great tendency to recombine to form molecular hydrogen. This is exactly what happens in the atomic hydrogen process. When the molecular hydrogen passes through the arc, much of it is changed into the atomic state and thus absorbs considerable amount of energy. In escaping the arc stream, these atoms recombine into molecules again at the outer edge of the arc fan, and the extra energy is released as heat. This extra heat is added to the intense heat of the arc itself, produces a temperature that is somewhat higher than either the ordinary arc or the gas flame. Theoretical temperature of the atomic hydrogen flame has been found to be 7,254 degrees Fahrenheit. However, heat absorption due to the formation of atomic hydrogen, it says here, reduces this to 5,340 degrees. But it talks about the what you're talking about as far as recombining.
Yeah.
So all these books are making mistakes, I guess.
The thing that's interesting is that liquid hydrogen is 99% atomic hydrogen.
Right?
No, there's ortho and parahydrogen. I can't remember which is which, but one of those states of hydrogen has a lot more energy. Just because they're not pointed opposite directions, the atoms are pointed the same direction. And I thought, well, this is interesting. This is another free energy process hiding in there between ortho and monohydrogen. Ortho and parahydrogen. And because it takes less energy to create parahydrogen than you get back when they convert.
How about that?
And that's just another one of those little free energy processes. The same thing happens, when you compress it and liquefy it, it takes less energy to vaporize it again than it took to compress it.
Really?
In other words, when you can vaporize it easier than you compress it. So you get a gain in energy just like that. And you can do the same thing with liquid air.
It happens quite a few times in nature, and yet we're taught to ignore that again. I don't see how people...
See, I don't think it's
see how
magic.
science people can explain this stuff away all the time.
I just think that these elements are absorbing energy from cosmic sources when they're in a state of change. And because Tesla's theory of radioactivity is that the radioactive elements are not producing the radiation. They actually are being produced by the element reacting with zero-point radiation, what he called the primary solar rays or starlight, a very high-frequency form of radiation that's produced in stars. And he called this the primary solar rays, and I call it the zero-point radiation because this matches the definition today. And this radiation is ubiquitous. It comes from all directions. It's so high frequency it doesn't react with most matter at all. It passes right through everything. But I believe that certain elements, when they react and change, when they're in a change of state, or let's say they're in an act of mutation, such as in K-capture, that they react with this and produce a radioactive effect. Because I don't think they've ever proven that mass loses weight through radiation. That's
that what they
all
claim?
strictly mathematical predictions. Yeah.
Ah.
According to E equals mc squared, if something sits there and puts out this high energy radiation, it's supposed to eventually convert all the mass, as long as it's producing
energy.
radiation, into pure, what they call pure energy. And that's the biggest joke I've ever seen in my life. There's no such thing as pure energy. What would be pure energy? Energy is the ability to do work. How can an ability have a pure form in some physical
So in a way, it's a process of transition that creates the work.
It's just the potential that exists. That's all energy is. It's not a physical entity any more than time is some sort of little entity flying around in space. Time is just a fiction that we've invented just as a convenience to describe the rate at which events occur. And
all of a sudden now we're supposed to think that it's an entity in and of itself.
Yeah, and we could travel in it, you know. Like
maybe pretty soon they'll have time particles, like they have gravitons and things like that.
Timatons. Yeah. Chronotons. Oh, no, I better not say something like that. Next thing you know, I'll be seeing it in print.
Yeah, they'll think that's a great idea. Tesla has a very interesting take on iron, for instance, here. He talks about it in terms of electricity. Let's see. Unless we should make a radical departure in the character of the electric currents employed, iron will be indispensable. Yet the advantages it offers are only apparent. So long as we use feeble magnetic forces, it is by far superior to any other metal. But if we find ways of producing great magnetic forces, then better results will be obtainable without it. In fact, I have already produced electric transformers in which no iron is employed and which are capable of performing 10 times as much work per pound weight as those with iron. This result is attained by using electric currents at a very high rate of vibration produced in novel ways instead of the ordinary currents now employed in industries. I've also succeeded in operating electric motors without iron by such rapidly vibrating currents, but the results so far have been inferior. He has a whole different take on...
Now, he's talking about replacing iron with aluminum.
Yes.
You see, now, you see which way he's moving towards something that's lightweight. And I have heard this before, that aluminum can be made to function as a ferromagnetic material.
Aluminum?
Yes.
How about that? And you feel that Tesla might have been onto this?
Yes. I think he might have developed this. He disclosed that he had a special generator that his description of this generator's output was so phenomenal that it's almost incredible. But he said it was composed of aluminum, iron, and copper combined in an unusual or novel way. And so I've been mystified by this for quite some time. And there's one of watt-hour meters.
This is what you were alluding to, or you feel that Tesla was alluding to, this being a Tesla invention originally, where he basically this is an elaboration on his unipolar generator, which he was experimenting with. This might have been one of the ultimate results of it. Could you go further into that?
Well, I just kind of stumbled across this with at the time, back in the late 70s, I had an apartment in my house, and I wanted to know how much electricity was being used internally in that one apartment. So I picked up a couple of antique watt-hour meters in Albuquerque at a salvage place, but these were antiques, and they were 2 110 meters, which I've been told are very expensive now to get one of those kind of meters. But anyway, I got these for a couple of dollars a piece, and I hooked them up in the apartment, but there were no labels on what was the in wire and what was the out wire. These were so antique that they just had posts on there for connecting wires, and there was no label. So I just kind of figured out, well, let's see, I'll run the end wires in here, and I'll have 2 of them to do 220 for this apartment. Apparently, I hooked them up backwards, and what they would do is the meter would spin quite rapidly when power first started to be used in the apartment. And the more power, they began to slow down. And finally, they would get, when the power usage was higher, they would just sit and vibrate. And I called it snoring because these things made a vibration. The whole house would vibrate with these things. I mean,
Really? Yeah.
yeah, it'd make the whole house shake. And if the power usage went up higher, they went in reverse. And the electric bill on the whole complex dropped by about a third. So these
So
meters
it's
appear
putting
to be,
electricity into the system.
they appear to be generating power. And so I just got to, when I was at a salvage place looking for some metals and whatever, in my little inventor trip that I do, and there was an old man there, and his name was Dort, and he was from Virginia, and he says, my father invented, and I started talking to him about these watt-hour meters because he was interested in this sort of stuff, and he says, well, my father invented the original generator that's used on highly top-secret Navy subs today. And
Here we go with
it
the
was
subs
based on
again.
a Tesla invention, and the Nazis stole it. And now the government uses it and it's highly classified. And I told him about these meters. He said, when that meter is stationary and vibrating, he said, that's the center of load. He says, aluminum is the reflector, and copper is the active element, and iron is the magnetic. And he said that this kind of technology was incorporated in his father's invention, which is a Tesla oscillator. And in investigating these Tesla oscillators, Tesla had an oscillator in the 1890s that had a little piston in it that was driven by compressed air. And it only had to vibrate about a 1/16 of an inch, just hum. But the inductors, there were two inductors that were on a shaft that the piston was attached to, and these two inductors were just windings that cut the magnetic lines of force in these two big cores, and the windings were over 50 miles long in that. And so that would correspond to what Tesla talked about, 925 mile wavelength, which would be for the Earth about 13 and a half cycles per second. And this is what they use for ELF technology. And that means that the Navy submarines are not, that the ELF waves are used not only just to transmit messages, they're also used to transmit power. So the submarines actually, and this is what the Germans used in their electro U-boats.
Always the underlying theme of submarines and submarine power.
Yeah, it's
being
like
a clandestine type of piece of equipment to begin with, what better thing to power it?
Tesla said one of his greatest discoveries at Colorado Springs was the discovery of terrestrial waves that went from pole to pole. And that was one of the discoveries that he made. So basically this ELF technology would do nothing but like make this wave energy in the Earth accessible. And that would be how they would get a 13,000 mile range out of these submarines in World War II.
Well, we have up on the screen now Tesla's unipolar...
30,000 miles, take it back. 30,000 miles.
30,000.
That's a lot.
It sure is. His version of the unipolar generator, which, of course, as you can see, is very similar to the watt-hour meter, suspiciously similar in a lot of ways. And it's funny because when I heard you speaking about this once before, and even in your book, I'm thinking to myself, if this were to be true, that somehow they have surreptitiously been using this equipment, then I could pick up one of these meters somewhere, and the only working components, or the most relevant components, would be the disc and the magnets, and it would all be the same, and the rest of it would just be cosmetic or possibly a prop even. Well, that's pretty, stretching credulity to the limit, and I just wanted to see how far this idea went. So I went to my scrapyard, my local scrapyard, and was able to dredge one of these things up. Steve, can you get this? And as you can see, it's a I believe this is Westinghouse watt-hour meter. And it has, a lot of us have been looked at this from time to time in our backyard and wondered what all this wonderful dealy-bobs are up in the front here that runs all these great little dials and things, and it's just endless technology here. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe it isn't what Mr. Lyne is talking about because of all this wonderful stuff here. But if it's true, all this stuff would be irrelevant. And I look back here and I found that there were 2 screws, and only 2 screws, holding this to the rest of the apparatus. And when this drops off, what do you have left here is the disc, the aluminum disc, the magnet here, and 2 electromagnets in the back.
Now, Tesla
that's
said it
all.
was essential the magnets were weak.
This is a weak magnet right here, a weak permanent magnet right there.
The reason for the weak magnet is so the magnetic field can be reversed and oscillate as it bounces off the aluminum.
Right. So here we have a relatively modern version of this, and it's a Faraday disc or a Tesla disc, more properly termed, running the whole show. Now, what I'd like to do is compare this to an older meter.
Well, according to their theory, they're saying that when current passes through the flux, or rather, the flux runs counter to the electrical flux that's created by the electromagnet. The idea is that when the flux passes through the disc, it's supposed to create a thrust on the disc and turn it a certain direction. And then the metering gadget is supposed to measure the number of times per second or minute or whatever that this thing turns in all these little gears and show you all these little digits to measure the amount of current that you're using. But the truth of the matter is there something here that bears looking at, because it's really a generator.
Now,
Originally.
what would be the purpose of them plugging in free energy generators to each of our houses?
It could increase the amount of power that they're actually being paid for. In other words, they could generate the seed power to make this thing oscillate, and then you would be billed for what the meter says you used, when in fact the meter is generating a lot of the power. Along with the poles and the plates underneath all the poles. They'll have copper plates under
And you
them.
feel that the power stations alone wouldn't be enough to keep this moving along?
Yeah, I think, well, the power that we get here comes from the Four Corners region. That's way up in the north, on the corner of New Mexico is where that's coming from. And it just seems to me that there's an awful lot of power to be used there, and I don't know how they're generating that much up there for
Sure.
all the usage that's going on. I kind of tend to think that some of that power is coming from Earth source and also from these little generators, which are also extracting that energy from the starlight or photon
Starlight?
energy, whatever you want. It's sometimes called starlight. Some people use the term zero-point energy, but that's an incorrect term. That's a relativist term. And that's the zero-point oscillations in the space-time continuum type of stuff.
We're back to that again.
The quantum fabric, or they use all these little
Sure.
weird terms. But that's not supposed to be true according to relativist theory, because you can never have one-half quantum. In other words, they use this all the time. They use this in the neutrino theory. But according to the relativist theory, you can never have a half quantum. You've got to have a full quantum, because the electron is indivisible,
Oh, right, yeah.
and that's not true.
Let's compare the fairly modern watt meter to something, again, we've dredged up in our little explorations. This thing is called a frequency relay. This is much older. This is circa 1930s, possibly. And as you can see, it has all the relevant components on it. It has the disk, the weak magnet, and the electromagnets, and a power resistor up here, but basically that's it. And this has an inhibitor that causes it to oscillate. So, your comments?
Yeah, it's it closes the switch. It shows here, it says close left at 61.9 cycles. Close right, they don't even show. But you see two little contacts, one here and one there. When this disc goes here, it closes that one. When it goes here, it closes this one. So it's oscillating back and forth. And I assume that it has something to do with these coils out here. But I don't know what a frequency relay would be, except this 61.9 is almost 62 cycles per second. It sounds to me like it, if the frequency isn't right, it opens or closes a switch here. But it also could be vibrating back and forth. It's got a limiter on it and a spring that makes it return to one position. But it looks like some very mysterious little gadget.
Yeah, it's suspicious how similar that is to a modern-day gadget without all the bells and whistles on the front. Apparently, they weren't too interested in concealing technology as much as
well, according to
more
that
sophisticated.
diagram that you had on there earlier, where it showed the unipolar generator, you can see where Tesla shows in the illustration that the positive charges go one way in the magnetic field and the negative charges go around the other way. Here. Okay, now you can see one set of charges goes this way and the other set goes back this way. I can't see the markings on there, but in that magnetic field, because a magnetic field will do work on moving charges. And then the current is, you see you have a loop here. Here you've got a thing on the edge to pick up current, and here you got a return loop near the center. Now, Tesla had a subdivided disk. He said if you subdivided it this way, you could energize the field, and if you subdivided it the other way, you could de-energize the field. So if you had a disk with subdivisions going this way, back that way, this way, and back the other way, then when you spun this disk between these fields, you would cause an alternating magnetic field. If you put windings on that field, you have a generator that's far beyond the current that could be generated by this disk generator.
And this could be as big as the watt meters we just showed. And that's all you need.
You get an oscillating magnetic field with windings around it, and you could get a lot more energy this way. And this is how most of his technology that got high output worked. But he described one generator that was special that we don't have anything on. The government's concealed it. That the output was phenomenal, and it sounds like the watt-hour meter from his description of it.
Wow!
From what we can get our hands on.
And just for good measure here, we have just another photograph of the same thing, basically, with the magnets and the disc, the weak magnets in the front here, and the disc going through it, and this business.
That's just to measure the disc span. But the one that I hooked up backwards, the disc would rotate fastest when the current usage was lowest. And then as the usage went up, it began to sit stationary and vibrate, and then it began to rotate the opposite direction. And so it indicated to me it's generating more power than is being used at that point when it's going backwards. When it's at stationary, the center of load, it's generating as much as you're using. And the fact is during World War II, the Germans used some of these devices which were powered by projected beam. They were robotic devices.
What kind of projected beam? Would that be microwave?
Power beam. It's a special beam that Tesla developed, and he described it. He described the device around 1915 as his dirigible torpedo, which he had tested, and he said it was capable of 300 miles a second, which is 1.5 million miles per hour.
Do you think he
And
was exaggerating? A lot of people feel
I don't think that was, it may not have been an exaggeration. I don't know how fast this ship that I saw was capable of going, but I know that it had a way of, and from the way I understand the technology, it's totally different from this air spike thing. The way the flying saucer technology works, it's explained in the 1890s writings of Tesla and a few other major scientists in the world. The ether particles are stretched in the front with a DC brush discharge. That brings in something called the tubes of force, which are electrical force that carry momentum. And when this enters the ship and are dissolved in the ship, it imparts momentum at 90 degrees to the electric and magnetic forces.
so. In respect, you can control
Yes.
momentum.
Yeah, it all
Or
has
you
to...
can control. Can you control inertia?
Yes.
Electrically.
Well, the way I understand it, and just from my own analysis, inertia and momentum are the same thing. Inertia is the tendency of a body to remain at rest or in its particular state of motion, whereas momentum is the same thing. Bodies in motion tend to remain in motion. However, according to Tesla and J.J. Thomson, the discoverer of the electron, momentum is the product of these tubes of force which exist in space, and they're at random until they're united by this brush discharge or by a body moving through space. Then that body accumulates a certain number of these tubes, and that imparts momentum to the body. So if you can block these ether particles from passing, you can block inertia. And that's exactly what Tesla's...
So this is actually in the literature by J.J. Thomson and Tesla.
Yes.
We're talking the 1800s.
Yes.
Getting back to saucer technology, German saucer technology, you claim in your book that you were at a salvage yard and had collected something. In fact, you have a photograph in the book. You call it a Pile-Tochter compass. Could you explain a little bit about that?
Well, literally, Pile-Tochter Kompass means polar slave compass. Tochter meaning daughter, so it's kind of a little humor in there, German humor, that the daughter is equivalent to a slave. But what that means is this is a slave compass, so there's a master compass, which is a gyro. The gyro is the master compass, and the polar slave compass will then pick up the heading that is calibrated into the master gyro, which this particular device it's mounted this way, so the dial is 360 degrees this way. It's set off in 30-degree increments, and it has a dial here, which you turn 30 degrees left, 30 degrees right. You can also do 60, 90, any 30-degree increment. But this device then has a little electric motor on it, so that when the ship changes directions, let's say that you turn the flying saucer 90 degrees to the right. Well, the main compass is calibrated to show true north. So when the ship starts moving this direction, then this little motor cuts on and rotates a dial that's with gears on it around to show you the correct flight heading according to true north on the master compass. And the reason this kind of device was necessitated in the first place was because the flying saucer has an electric field around it that makes an ordinary compass totally useless. And another reason is the flying saucer moves so fast that you're going to be over the next state in a few seconds, if you don't cut the power. And so this particular one that I have is a primitive device compared to what they must have now. But it was the only thing they could come up with to navigate these saucers. And these devices which you have here, you have a couple.
Yeah. We have here something from an American salvage yard in California. Very similar to what Mr. Lyne's talking about as far as the German version, as far as the 30-degree increments, correct? And it has a dial which adjusts here. This thing is thrashed to bits, so You'll have to excuse its shape. And we have the specifications here. Indicator gyromagnetic compass type V7A. Specification MIL 15126A. Order number AF23804. Stock number 6263-15700. Kierfot Company Incorporated, property of U.S. government. I bought it at a salvage yard, so everything's totally legal. And it's very similar to what Mr. Lyne is talking about in his book. You might want to point out the similarities or differences.
Well,
do you feel that this was from an airplane or saucer?
Yeah.
Or?
This is Air Force, USAF, type V-7A. Now, this is not the same kind of device that I have, though, but it uses some of the same technology. This is a navigator's device that will give a true reading for north, south, in different degrees, and it's graduated for any of these headings on here. The one that I have, the reason I knew what it was when I saw it was because when I was a boy, I slept in the backyard to watch these ships coming from New Mexico at night, flying in squadrons, and they would turn in 30-degree increments, 30, 60, 90, 180, and I could tell they were at very high altitude, and I hadn't seen one up close. All I could do was see them in the sky at night, high in the sky, navigating, doing maneuvers, and I would see a bunch of them flying along, and I'd see one coming along. It looked like a star, bright light, and it would go along and then suddenly do a without slowing down, it would do an instant turn, angular turn, and it was in these 30-degree increments. Well, when I saw this device on a scrap heap in Albuquerque, I knew that's what it was. And I picked it up, and certainly the label on the back, on the side of it, showed that it was a Pyle-Tochter compass, and it was labeled KT-small p large 2, KTP2, manufactured by List on October the 10th, 1943. It was a guidance compass from a German 1943 vintage flying saucer. And
now,
the device, and this was when I bought it, was in 1979. It was classified. So how did it get in this scrap heap? Soon after I got this device, the government apparently found out that I had it. So they went to the scrap dealer to find out how he got it. And the scrap dealer then said, I got it from a guy at Sandia Base. So they went, the guy at Sandia Base was the guy who normally brought scrap released for salvage to him. This guy was stealing classified, he didn't know it was classified salvage when he stole it and sold it. And so they put him under surveillance, they caught him doing it again, and they put him in jail. And then that information got back to the scrap dealer and got back to me. So that was classified information. They weren't supposed to let that kind of information get out. The scrap dealer wasn't supposed to know it. I wasn't supposed to know it, but I know it. And I found it out. So I knew that they couldn't come and get this thing back from me without confirming what it was. And why was some device from 1943 still classified if it was nothing more than an inertial guidance system?
That's a good point.
And
If it's present on every airplane in the German Air Force, and it's present in every airplane.
The dial is in the
American
middle on it, and it's clear that this device controls the direction of the flying saucer, and that the saucer can turn in any of these 30-degree increments, just like the ones that I saw.
But this one you feel is different in that this would be for an airplane?
Yeah, this would be for navigating, and what the purpose of this is you're using an inertial guidance system or navigational system to maintain a true north heading so that you know what direction you're really going.
Right.
Ordinary compass could be influenced by all sorts of things, magnetic declination, metal on the ship, electrical things can influence it. But on this device, it's strictly inertial. So when they take off, they calibrate the master compass. No matter which way the ship turns, it maintains its true heading in relation to this compass. And so they can always know what their heading is with accuracy for navigational purposes.
Also in this wonderful junkyard that we were in, There's another piece of salvage here called a master indicator gyroflux gate compass. Do you see any relation between these two?
Yeah, both of these more or less are the same thing. This is a World War II variety, and this is a later version, which you can see the jet plane on the pointer here,
right,
that this comes from the jet era. So as best I can tell, it may be made in the 50s, maybe 54 because of these numbers, in which case it's definitely in the jet plane era.
So it serves the same purpose.
Yeah, and it's smaller, more compact, and this is a World War II version that was used to get a correct heading with an inertial compass. And so you have this is the master indicator, as it says on its, it says master indicator. So this will give them a true heading for north, and then they can plan all of their navigation around that. They want to know where north is.
So the technology they might have quelled from this type of knowledge of inertial guidance systems to use on
But
the German
I think
type.
the device that I have, the Pfeiltochter compass, I believe that it originally was a Nikola Tesla invention that was developed in conjunction with Sperry Gyroscope Company in 1917, because there's a documentation in my book that Tesla tested a robotic plane on a round trip, 200 miles round trip flight in conjunction with Sperry. And
They
so,
mentioned the company name, Sperry.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah,
And
they do a lot of
Elmer
compass.
Sperry was a friend of Tesla's. Tesla apparently developed this friendship and used Sperry to develop this thing on this robotic ship that was flown on a 200-mile. It was taken off, landed, taken off again and brought back, all robotically. And it was the first flight of that type, as far as I know. And I believe that because I've found several other technologies that were properties of the Sperry gyroscope, later Sperry Unisys, which end up in Nazi hands, there seemed to be a trading with the enemy thing going
How
on
about
there.
that?
And for instance, the Klystron tube, which was developed by the Varian brothers in 1939, was a Sperry property. And researchers claim that the Nazis had the Klystron tube and show diagrams of it in Nazi documents. So it looks like the Klystron found its way along with the Pfeiltochter.
The Nazis, the Nazis seem to have a very good handle on microwave technology.
Well,
During
the
this
first
time
guy
period
they
we're talking-
sent over here in 1936, actually he was invited by the American Rocket Society and the National Geographic and the Smithsonian Institution and the Simon and Florence Guggenheim Foundation, was a scientist, a rocket scientist named Willy Ley. And Ley was actually
very
the
popular.
tutor of von Braun.
Yes.
And Ley came over here at the invitation of the American Rocket Society and all the rest to work with Goddard. Now,
What's the time period we're talking about here?
1936. Actually, he was invited around 1935. And he came over here and he defected.
There was research being done prior to 1935 on rocket technology
Yes.
by individuals other than John Goddard
Yes.
here in this country.
Robert Goddard.
I'm sorry,
And,
yes.
and
Robert.
there was a rocket scientist who lived in Santa Fe from, I believe, the late 20s. I know he was here all during the 30s, and many people know him as a solar designer because he built a lot of solar houses and this sort of thing and wrote some books on the subject. But he was a rocket scientist whose rockets were actually outperforming all the other rockets before, but he used solid fuel. His name was Peter Van Dresser, and he was the author of the Van Dresser Constant, which von Braun talks extensively about when he talks about his plans to go to the moon. And because the Van Dresser's constant was used to compute the trajectory of the rockets. And it was also used to fire all those rockets into Belgium and England.
Let's talk a little bit about Wernher von Braun. His presence here in New Mexico apparently goes back a little further than is widely understood.
Yeah, this is all
People-
purged and kept out of the books. Nobody's ever told about this.
Right.
But Van Dresser was angry with Goddard because Goddard worked originally, as I said, Ley was sent over here, but Ley defected. So they had to find a replacement, and they took young von Braun and got him through his PhD program and promoted him as the director of research for rocketry in Germany and at the Peenemünde project, and they promoted him up and sent him over to replace Ley because Ley married a Russian ballerina named Olga Feldman and took out American citizenship papers by 1937. But back in 1935, he had defected, so they had to get a replacement. Now, how they arranged this is beyond me, but sure enough, von Braun came over here to replace Ley to work with Goddard for 2 years. However, what I found out was that he was working in a secret project at Los Alamos called P2, small p, large 2.
This is probably the most controversial part about it. It's one thing to say Wernher von Braun is present here prior to the war. Now you're claiming that he's responsible for technology other than rocketry.
You see, none of the misinformationists want to mention von Braun in relation to flying saucers. However, the Germans...
This is where you divert in your book, and you explain how you feel that he's very much involved, or had been very much involved.
I don't know whether Goddard knew about von Braun's work on the flying saucer, whether he was privy to it or not, but it appears that he may have been, because the U.S. government apparently didn't trust Ley at that time because he wasn't employed by the government. He worked as a writer. He was a very talented, intelligent person. And I don't know whether he could even still be alive. I don't know. But he had studied with Hermann Oberth also, and who was the Hungarian rocket genius. But Goddard's rockets were outperforming all the German rockets, so they wanted to get what they could. That was the cover, but what they really wanted to do was test this flying saucer idea. And they didn't know, because the U.S. government had treated Nikola Tesla so shoddily as if they considered him nuts. And they wouldn't listen to anything he said. It was just that crazy old guy who comes in here wants to sell us on these ideas, these wild ideas about ships that, go, so fast and so forth and defy gravity. And so all of their experts, who were MIT people mostly, just slandered Tesla up one side and down the other and managed to convince the government that he was nuts. And so the Germans, they sent their man to cultivate Tesla's friendship. They had a guy named George Sylvester Furick in New York, came from a very well-known intellectual family, and Furick cultivated Tesla's friendship, persuaded him along the lines of helping with the German developments. And I don't mention this much in the book, but I've some I put in on this. This is
so you discovered a German connection with
Tesla. There's
Tesla.
definitely. Tesla got the morning paper, the morning German papers at the German embassy every day. So he'd gotten pretty tight with the German embassy because he sold stuff to the Germans in the past. He offered...
This is prior to the war, so he doesn't feel that this is some kind of treasonous act.
Yeah, see, in World War I, in 1914, Tesla offered his turbine to the U.S. Navy, and they weren't interested, so he sold it to the German Minister of High Marine in 1914. So they were interested. They bought his turbine. And then, in World War II, he offered all this stuff to the government. He offered the U.S. government ELF technology in 1914, 15, along in there, 17.
Which they're using now as part of...
He offered them that technology then, and they turned it down, you see. And eventually the Germans got hold of the technology, and they were using it in World War II. They had submarines that used Tesla's oscillator to give them a 30,000-mile range. And
these were the electro U-boats.
Yeah. They had a Tesla oscillator that was driven partially off of thermodynamic and electromagnetic energy gathered from the Earth's field that oscillated at harmonic of the Earth. And they used a gas to drive a little piston that powered some electric inductors that cut the lines of force and generated electric current. this was a generator that Tesla developed in the 1890s, and run by more or less by gas, basically liquefied air. And
Run
he was
through a Tesla turbine?
Yeah. Well, no, you run it. Well, he probably used his pumps to compress the air in one stage of it, but what he was using was the same thing that Linde filed patents on soon after Tesla's laboratory was burned to the ground, which makes you wonder.
Another coincidence.
Another big coincidence. And the Germans were storing huge quantities of liquefied air before World War I. What were they going to do with all that stuff,
Sure.
So that was their U-boat stuff, and they were already planning on this stuff. Boy, it makes your hair stand on end to think how they moved into action so early, to get this big thing going. But
so how does this tie into the P2 project with von Braun and Tesla's technology? How did von Braun acquire what he needed to develop this?
Well, they knew that, that they had questions, about Tesla's claims. So naturally, they wanted a proof of concept. So that's what they did at Los Alamos from 1936 to 38. However, I know that they didn't get all the technology because the ship I saw in 1953 still had the bug in it of precession problems.
And you felt that it looked like it was lost.
Yeah, it had a precession problem, which if they had gotten all the technology from Tesla, which Tesla had, they would have known how to solve that problem, and so would the U.S. government. None of them paid any attention. If they'd looked in Tesla's documents from the 1890s, there was the answer on how to stop that precession problem. And the saucers would do this when they hovered, and they couldn't see anything. Everything's doing this outside,
Sure.
And when they move fast, it's just a mere wobble, high-frequency wobble. But Tesla just merely did some experimentation to figure out how to solve this problem, and apparently.
Now, prior, you felt that this precession had mostly to do with the movement of the electrical discharge.
The brush discharge.
Brush
which is
discharge.
used. The brush discharge is just like the Earth. It's like the aurora borealis. You have a brush discharge in the Earth. The Earth draws in the tubes of force, and it's also the place where a huge current is going into the Earth from the sun. And so there's a huge electric current going from the sun through frozen magnetic lines of force in space, through the Earth, and back to the equator of the sun, where it goes with the return current. And that's what imparts the momentum to the Earth around the sun. So this is documented and proven by the scientist Johannes Alfvén, the Norwegian scientist, who carried on some of the work that Alfvén did was based on the work before him of Christian Birkeland, who apparently was a Tesla nut too. And I believe that the reason they got into this area of research was because Tesla's dynamic theory of gravity, which was never published, had somehow leaked out. And so
This is something you've been attempting to reconstruct through available text. The reference that you quote is his lecture before the immigrant welfare. What year was that?
Yeah, and he apparently had made the same announcements many years before, but he talked about
But he
it.
actually used the term dynamic theory of gravity.
Yes, he mentions this at a number of places in his writings, and the stuff was published. However, he intended to publish it, but he never did, and he worked it out in 1893 and 94, which was, I got the papers that he wrote just before that, and that were part of his lectures in England, in New York, and Paris, and so forth. And in those lectures was this information that basically went into his dynamic theory of gravity, and then a few times, at later times, he would include little bits of the theory in there. And at one time, he released a lot of information on the theory in poetic form. And so basically what Tesla said was that in the 1890s was that the brush discharge brought in the tubes of force, and according to J.J. Thomson, when the tubes of force are drawn into a conductor and dissolved in it, it imparts momentum because the space contains the mechanism for momentum. Well, Alfvén proves that most of the momentum of the solar system is in the planets. The sun has practically none because most of its momentum is being imparted and carried to the planets.
So this idea of centrifugal force creating some, after...
Baloney.
Is...
Even Einstein said there's no force at a distance as far as gravity is concerned. And he didn't even believe in the ether physics. But basically the theory is that there are all these onion-like layers in, for instance, the solar system of the sun's electrical energy, and the planets are traveling along certain lines of this.
It's almost like a toroid
Yeah.
shape?
And the planets are driving along it, and the momentum they possess is brought in by the electric current and the tubes of force, which are on the Earth. The Aurora Borealis, this Birkeland, had said, well, there's no way that we can have these huge magnetic currents on the ground unless there's a current of billions of amps flowing into the Earth on the North Pole. And so the aurora is actually a brush discharge. Now, the Aurora Borealis is not the same as the Aurora Australis on the other end. It's a cloudier thing. That's positive corona versus negative corona. Negative corona. Then Tesla invented his highest form of his coil was the single terminal coil, which he discovered, and he said it's my way of creating DC current through induction. And what it does is it creates a high-frequency DC pulse. If you'll notice from those coils there, now he's got two on one circuit, you see.
Right.
Now that's...
You can point with the...
yeah, you've got two coils on one circuit. You've got this coil here and this coil over here. And then you look at these coils and you look here. Let's see, there it says P1, see?
Interesting
and
reference.
over here it says P2.
Uh-huh.
So basically those are primaries, different primaries. And this, for instance, could be used. The only reason for having them in the same circuit is for a flying saucer. In other words, this
it doesn't
coil...
make sense the way it's set up. I mean,
Right.
if you are
Yeah.
signaling, as the patent claims, system of signaling, you wouldn't have a wire that's connected for 300 miles to signal. It defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah, I mean, it's all on the same oscillator. He's running these things on one oscillator. Now, this one over here is the one we should be looking at if you can get it in the picture. All right, that's more interesting because there you see the P1 and P2 right there, okay? Now, that's P2. It's expressed a little differently, but they didn't have these terms.
Now, this is the P2
1890s.
that you described in relation to the Pyle-Tactor compass.
Yeah, and here
And
you got a
also-
rotary spark gap
Yes.
powering two different oscillators, and notice that this capacitor has fewer plates than this one. And that's because this one is going to be tuned to a quarter wavelength. This one's going to be tuned to a half or a full wavelength. This one will produce a DC pulse, the brush discharge, what I call a pseudo-electrostatic discharge. This one produces an alternating high-frequency current. This is used on the bottom or the back of the ship to destroy the inertia. This is used to create the momentum in the direction of travel. So you basically can accelerate the ship and turn it at 90 degrees with this system by controlling the discharges in a polarity on the surface of the ship. Now, this particular coil is, if you notice, the primary is around the outside, and so the voltage increases towards the center. The primary is also connected to the secondary, so that at the same time the current enters the primary and travels around this direction, the current is entering the secondary and from the same source and traveling around this direction.
That's an interesting.
And it's like it's really kicking out that pulse, you see.
Yeah, that's
and-
totally different than how we're taught to build our Tesla coils these days from
Yeah.
little hobby kits.
Yeah. Well, see, Tesla
obviously
said
has
that
a purpose.
the DC electrostatic charge allows the ether carriers to enter easily into the ship, whereas in the high frequency, it tends to collect the positive ions around the opposite end of the ship, and the positive ions basically stop the flow of the ether. So you don't have any resistance to movement because there's no inertia being imparted. You have an imbalance of forces. You have inertia in one direction and a blockage of the ether carriers on the other, so they can do nothing but enter the ship and dissolve and impart momentum. Now, to make this possible, the Earth is emitting rapidly varying electrostatic forces of tremendous potential. And that rigidifies the ether in Earth's vicinity, which is why the Michelson-Morley experiment was false, is because the ether is stationary close to the Earth, but as you get further away from the Earth, the ether is more in motion. So if you tried to detect an ether drift close to the Earth, you wouldn't detect one. It's rigidified by the electrostatic forces and moves with the Earth, whereas outside the Earth's field, it's in relative motion. So the ether drift experiment was based on a false premise of a dynamic ether.
So somehow Tesla, or von Braun, Werner von Braun got a hold of this technology, and this is what he was developing in 1935?
See, Willy Ley was an expert on microwaves. He was the greatest expert on the microwaves maybe in the world in 1935.
And why would they need a microwave expert?
Yeah, why would they need a microwave expert? Now, what's interesting about Willy Ley is the government hired him in 1944. The Burke Aircraft Corporation moved to the environs of College Park, Maryland. And that, I believe, was the first American electropropulsive flying saucer project. That was after they discovered the Germans making these ships based on Tesla technology.
In Maryland?
And Maryland, it's right, College Park, Maryland, that's where the Goddard Institute is.
How about that? How cozy.
And the Space Flight Center. So that's a very high priority to some guy who writes science articles and poetry books for children about science, that was suddenly whisked away by the government after they realized that he was the only guy they knew who could tell them anything about this stuff. And so they hired him and put him to work right outside Washington, D.C. on some very high priority project.
So
Burke
they can keep an
Aircraft
eye on him.
Corporation of Georgia. Yeah.
That's interesting. I'd like to take a really strange jump here and talk about flying submarines. You included in your book an interesting chapter on flying submarines, ? You claimed that possibly the Germans had developed or used submarine tubes to create flying machines.
Yes. Well, it'd be perfect. I mean, weight is no object because the electromagnetic interaction is 10 to the 40th power times stronger than the gravitational interaction. So that means that a very tiny amount of electrical energy can pick up a huge object. And what triggered my awareness of this submarine pressure hull concept was a person I know and his daughter witnessed one of these ships. This man went to Albuquerque to pick up his daughter at an airport, at the Albuquerque airport. And when they began to drive back, this ship was hovering over their car all the way back to Santa Fe. He even followed them to their house. And he said that it had an old iron, what looked like an old iron ship's hull. He could see rivets on it, and it hummed like a diesel engine.
Apparently, these don't sound like alien spacecrafts from an advanced civilization.
Well, the ones in South America have been seen belching black smoke and making clanking noises. Probably some loose chain or something hitting the hull as they moved around, you see. I mean, but that would be perfect because the submarine pressure hull would be perfect for doing a prototype for von Braun's planned Mars mission because It contained a generator, all sorts of equipment you would need in a hermetically sealed environment. And the pressure hull is round, just like a cigar, and has slightly tapered ends on each end. And then around that, they built all of the ballast tanks and other things, and conning tower and everything. But the basic tube is just a round tube like that thing right there.
Yeah,
And
this is a picture we have of what's called here early 50s cigar craft seen by Joe Fieri near Woonsocket, Rhode Island. And it's very similar to what you're describing.
well, I have seen videos of a ship, and exact same description has been seen a number of times. One time off of South Africa, another time in Virginia, quite a few times in Colorado, and I have a video of the thing up in Idaho. And you can see it's silver. It's like stainless steel. And you can see halos around the ship. And as it's hovering, the halos are stationary. You can see the peaks and nodes of the high frequency, you see. And when the ship moves this way, the wave nodes move. If the ship moves this way, the waves nodes move this way. And if it's moving this way, they move the other way. But these are quite visible. I mean, I've seen it on television many times, and now I have my own video that was taken by some associates of this ship, and I can see the halo and the waveforms on the hull, and so it's perfect, verification of what I'm saying about the Tesla technology. The ship that really proved it to me was I saw a ship at Hyde Park in 1996, in January 1996, while I was at the 10,000 Waves Japanese bathhouse, and I was sitting in the tub with 6 other people, and there were some other people milling around, and I saw this flashing object comes along, and I watched it for a while, and I said, that is not an airplane. And I said, that's a UFO. And this guy across the tub said, it's a plane. I said, well, if it's a plane, why did it just park? And I said, look, here comes another one just like it. And there comes another one, parks near it. And I said, as long as they flash, I said that flying saucers put out a faint glow when they're moving slowly. When they move fast, they light up brighter, and that's the reason they're moving so slow, and the flash conceals the glow. I said, if this thing were to fly fast, it would light up real bright. And the thing lit up. It was huge compared to the little flashes. It looked like a little plane, but when it lit up at arm's length, it was this long, which means at that distance, it was about 10,000 feet. It was 400 feet long, approximately, and about 250 feet wide, and about 50 feet thick. It was shaped like a football field, rounded edges on it, and the thing took off and did a circle. As everyone watched with their jaws dropping, and I followed it with my finger. I said, everyone see that? And they said, yes. And I followed it around. It took about 10 seconds to make its circle. And it was about a 30-degree angle. So at 10,000 feet, that was 2,000 miles per hour. Instant. And stopped on a dime. It took off instantly at that speed, came back, stopped instantly in the same spot, while the other ship was still there. And so it glowed a dark green color, and you could see the purple Tesla corona coming out from above on the top and in front of it, and the bottom
This represents
screwed
the
with a positive
negative charge.
Yeah, it's a negative charge. It's that purple Tesla corona going out in the sky like this, and on the bottom was a positive corona. It's a dark green. They had apparently used quite a number of technologies to try to make that ship invisible. It wasn't supposed to be visible, but it was visible because of the weather conditions at the time.
So this idea of UFOs appearing and disappearing before people's eyes wouldn't be too hard to swallow if what is happening with this electrical corona is distorting the area around the ship.
Plus, they move instantly. This thing can move in. If you're perpendicular to the line of flight, you cannot see it at that speed. If it's close enough, you can't see it at all when it's moving as fast as it can move. So it appears to just they look like they're disappearing here and going over here. You see, they can jump around because you cannot see that ship when it's moving too fast. if they suddenly take off, it looks like they disappeared. All you see is it's gone. But they're just moving very fast. They can accelerate instantly.
So weight is no object.
Weight is no
Size
object.
is no object.
If you take a force, okay, if you take a stronger force, you can do a lot more work in the same period of time. Work is the ability to do work. Energy is the ability to do work. Work is movement of a mass through a distance. Therefore, if you use a stronger force, you can do more work in the same period of time. So if you use a force which is 10 to the 40th power stronger than the gravitational force, you can do that much more work, 10 to the 40th power times more work in the same period of time with that force. Now that's a free energy idea, because if you take a weak force and convert it to that stronger force, you can do a lot more work than you could as a weak force. So you can take gravitational energy, convert it into electrical energy, and do 10 to the 40th times more work with
It
it.
would seem obvious why certain energy cartels wouldn't want that kind of information floating around.
It will destroy them when it gets out, and it will.
Yeah, I'd like to talk further on some more free energy ideas. Just to finish up with, actually I want to ask you about Kenneth Arnold and his sightings, but initially what is interesting about this flying submarine business is Kenneth Arnold had some interesting comments to make about some flying saucers that were appearing here in America. Arnold insisted nevertheless that Morella bring him up to date, finally settled for a written account for which he apparently was interviewing a lot of witnesses. At this time, the West Coast was experiencing a siege of reports about mysterious submarines operating off United States coastlines. Arnold told Klein he is convinced there is a definite link between the saucers and the submarines. There you go. He makes a reference to submarines and UFOs, which I
And
find
notice
an
he's
interesting
subjected to
coincidence.
press ridicule. That's interesting, see?
Yeah, why would that
If
be?
the government didn't know what it was, they would be the first to be there to interrogate Arnold to find out what it was. If they didn't know what it was, they would certainly be interested, and they certainly wouldn't want to ridicule somebody that they would like to debrief. That tells you right there. Now, what I'm saying is in the stalemate, they worked out certain conditions where the Germans continued to cooperate through the United States government in this stuff, and so the continuity wasn't broken between the German projects and the American projects. They brought 15,000 personnel to New Mexico with that, along with, there were 116 top scientists taken to Alamogordo, for example, and one of them was the one that tested the Lafrance project in the Baltic, the first firing of a rocket from underwater in one of these little Lafrance subs. And
Gee, where have we heard about that before?
yeah, and
Also, if we reference back to Kenneth Arnold's very famous sighting, which started the whole UFO craze in 1947, right here we have his quote: "This very bright flash, like an arc light, was coming from a group of objects far up to the north of Mount Rainier in the area of Mount Baker, which is almost in line with Mount Rainier and Mount Adams. I saw a chain of peculiar aircraft approaching Mount Rainier very rapidly. They seemed to fly in an echelon formation. However, in looking at them against the sky and against the snow of Mount Rainier as they approached, I just couldn't discern any tails on them. And I had never seen an aircraft without a tail. These were fairly large-sized, and there were 9 of them." Like an arc lamp is an interesting reference.
that's
he
Boeing
makes.
territory, by the way. That's
Oh.
all the German scientists that worked out the contracts with Boeing aircraft were building American prototypes up there already by 1947.
Huh. Well, again, that's quite a coincidence. Here we have a picture of Kenneth Arnold himself holding up an interesting photograph of his flying saucer.
That's a drawing of the kind he saw.
Yes.
That looks a lot like a Horton flying wing.
Well, that's That's interesting you should mention that, because we have a picture of a Horton flying wing, so that we can make a comparison.
Yeah.
Gee,
Yeah.
you think that's what he saw?
But you see, that's the reason I think that there's a possibility that maybe Kenneth Arnold might be guilty of disinformation.
So
Because there
feel,
you see jet engines, you see.
Sure.
That's not a flying saucer if you've got jet engines on it. See, it's
Well, the
electrically
interesting
powered.
reference I'd like you to comment on is his remark about the blue light like an arc lamp. Do you feel that maybe he did see something, and that they were using something in addition to just turbojets on the back there?
They might have been trying to develop some sort of hybrid technology where they could see. One of the problems with some of these saucers is getting them off the ground, because what happens is the electrical energy tends to arc to the ground a lot of times, so they've got to get them up in the air somehow before they take off. And they've used various kinds of rocket and jet power sometimes to get them off the ground.
You mentioned that in respect to Lonnie Zamora's sighting.
And that's what they observed there, was these blue, what looked like maybe something like ion jets or something. You see, chemical rockets that were to get it up off the ground so they could kick in the electric power. That way they didn't need so much in the way of landing gear. If they could soften the landing on these things and the takeoffs, then they just needed some little pods that came out to land on.
Here's a photograph of his original sketch. Shows a wedge-type or heel-shaped craft. And here's an early photograph of, again, a heel-shaped craft. This looks like it has some kind of glow to it. Your comments?
Yeah, I think they were experimenting around with different shapes. Basically, I think it all has boiled down to what you might call the lenticular and the linear. Well, the lenticular type is a linear type, and the circular type. Basically, the ship that I saw at Los Alamos, at Hyde Park above Santa Fe, it was a huge lenticle, you see. It was a huge lozenge shape. And you think about that, it was as big as a football field with the track around it. 5-story building, 50 feet thick. I'm going on proportion because I worked with proportion as a sculptor and a painter, so I can calculate proportional shape and size and so forth pretty well. And this thing would be like a flying 5-story building as big as that shape inside a football field and a track. Now that's a huge ship.
That is huge.
And what are they going to do with this ship? Now, the big question of me is, how are they hiding these things?
Where are they hiding?
And I have heard all kinds of scenarios from reliable people, people who know about such landing schemes in places like Switzerland, where they have whole cliffs or whole mountainsides that slide out, and the ship goes inside, and then the whole mountain closes back up.
You're saying people might have seen something like this?
Yes, I know people that have seen stuff like this, and I also know that there are people who have seen these things go into water. So what would be better than to have a lake just as a landing pad for this ship that goes underwater, and then there's a dolly down there that pulls it sideways into a place up the hill that's out of the water, or through an airlock.
In fact, there have been several sightings in Puerto Rico, in lagoons out there in Puerto Rico, and to make it even more convenient, these are held by the United States as wetlands, so that there's no human contact on these things, and these Puerto Ricans, these poor people, are seeing these lights going into the water over there. So that seems to be another cozy aspect of keeping this international biosphere program going on, is that you can do anything with the land that you want, including landing football-sized flying saucers under the water.
Well, all you need is unlimited funds, and and you've got it.
Yes. Who do we know that has unlimited funds?
anything, you see, my theory is, this is the only thing that's theoretical that I'm saying is, why have they kept it secret so long? And my theory is the big corporations don't want us to have this technology, because when you start making a list of everything that this thing is going to obsolesce, it's a lot.
It's a big
Transportation, fuel, all kinds of things. Aeronautical companies, airlines, you name it. Spare parts. There's not a lot to wear out.
And who runs the airlines? The CIA?
Yeah.
You want to put them out of business?
You know, when you start looking at that, it's my opinion that the only reason the military even is allowed to use this technology is so that they can argue that it's a national security interest to be protected and use the government to protect the technology from us. In other words, to keep us from not talking about the Russians or Chinese. Their governments have this same technology. The only reason they keep it secret is to keep us, the citizens who pay for it, from finding out how and using it.
Right.
And so here's the government telling these outrageous lies to every child in America, every adult in America, and every old person in America about aliens. They've concocted this whole thing, and an intelligence network distributed it through
making sure that we're dumbed down enough to where a lot of people would actually buy that.
Yeah, I'm not surprised at this recent scandal that they dug up about the dumbness of the school books they're writing.
Huh.
You know, that's no surprise to me.
No, of course not.
And,
actually, that's been an ever-present dream of certain groups in our society for over 100 years.
They've been stealing and hiding technology for so long. They don't want it to move any faster. They want it to move real slow.
Sure.
Because they've got all the technology they want us to have, and they want to keep it moving slow because they've got all that oil to sell us, and they're jacking up the prices whenever they think they can get away with it.
Sure.
And they know that every time they jack up the prices, though, it stimulates vapor carburetor research, and so they can only jack the price up for a while, and then they have to drop it back down again to kill the research. You see.
Then people forget about that. To give you an idea of what we were capable of in 1947, referring once again back to Kenneth Arnold's sighting, on the way he made some rough calculations of the speed of the formation from the timing he had done near Mount Rainier. He came up with an answer of around 1,700 miles an hour in 1947.
That could be the Horton jets, you see.
Do you think that they would achieve that kind of speed?
Yeah, I think they could have. You know, you never know how fast a plane goes. You can never rely on any published information about its speed. I mean, if you look at an old Jane's manual, you'll see that in many cases the top speed of the aircraft and all the other characteristics are classified, still classified at certain times. So they usually won't even tell you, and if they do tell you, you can't really know whether it's true or not. You know, it could be much faster.
Sure.
But you know, you never really know what the top speed of an aircraft is because usually they won't even publish it. They'll show the picture of it in the manual, but they won't tell you how fast its climb rate is and so forth. Its performance characteristics may be classified, but I believe they could have gotten, with some of those Horton planes, they could have gotten close to that. From what I saw, the pictures of these things, those are pretty advanced designs. What they do is they don't want this technology to go too fast. So they get a lead, and they just want it to go at a certain speed, as long as they're faster than the Russian planes or whatever.
Right. As long as, just to keep that edge.
Meanwhile, they're going 25,000 miles an hour, like the one I saw in 1953. And then they're talking, they've got articles all out there in the papers that they're controlling, talking about how we might be on the verge of discovering anti-gravity technology.
Yeah,
you know?
I suppose our old friend Murabo will figure that one out for us, too. I'd like to thank Mr. Lyne for being our guest on the 33rd Parallel. I hope there are many who feel as I do, that it's a good and healthy thing to entertain alternative views on items of such importance as our world history and scientific progress. This is, in fact, the primary objective of this video series. I hope you found it worthwhile, and remember, the truth can flow from lies,
but lies cannot flow from the truth. Good night.
A companion guide to the 33rd Parallel video series will soon be available. Look for it on our website at www.flyingsaucerfactory.com. Also available now from the Flying Saucer Factory: a German U-boat on the United States coastline, a secret agreement between sworn enemies, an underground base built into the permafrost of Antarctica, Rear Admiral Byrd and his armada of 4,000 men in a confrontation with unknown aircraft that can fly from pole to pole in a matter of minutes. When reading about it isn't enough, it's time to see what you've been missing. A graphic dramatization of Admiral Byrd's Operation High Jump, fully illustrated by a top Disney TV animator. Order it now from the Flying Saucer Factory at www.flyingsaucerfactory.com.